You've been misled about inner strength. They told you resilience comes from toughing it out, hiding your pain, pretending you're fine. But if that were true, why do you still feel like you're holding your breath all the time? Why does one small thing still break you down inside, even when everything looks okay on the outside? The truth is, resilience doesn't come from pretending you're strong. It comes from learning how to be soft and unbreakable, from knowing how to sit with your pain, not run from it. And no one understood that better than the Buddhists. For thousands of years, monks, yogis, and seekers have built a kind of strength the world forgets. A quiet strength, a deep, rooted, fearless strength. Not from escaping suffering, but from understanding it. Not from ignoring fear, but from looking straight at it and smiling. Tonight, we're going to tap into that. You're not here just to fall asleep. You're here to remember who you really are beneath the fear, beneath the stress, beneath the overthinking. These ancient teachings will guide you inward to a place where nothing can shake you. Not the past, not the future, not even your own mind. As you listen, something will begin to shift. The tension in your chest will loosen. The racing thoughts will slow. And a quiet power will start to rise inside you. Steady, calm, unshakable. When you wake up tomorrow, you won't just feel rested. You'll feel different, more grounded, more alive, more you. This isn't just another sleep meditation. This is a doorway, a reset, a return to yourself. Are you ready to remember the strength that's already inside you? Let's begin. Before we begin, take a slow breath. This is where things shift. What you're about to hear isn't theory. It isn't a story to entertain your mind before sleep. It's an ancient path, mostly hidden, often misunderstood, that shows how true resilience is built step by step within the mind itself. Not through positive thinking, not through pretending to be okay, but through a transformation so deep it rewires how you respond to everything: fear, grief, loneliness, confusion, even joy. Tonight, we're going into the 10 bhumis, the sacred stages of a bodhisattva's mind. Most people never hear about them. Even fewer understand their power. But once you do, your entire relationship with pain, purpose, and peace will never be the same. Let's begin. The first opening of this path is marked by something most people don't expect: joy. But not the kind of joy that depends on life going your way. This isn't about happiness that comes from a good day or someone saying the right words. It's deeper. It comes from realizing that your life has meaning beyond yourself. That your suffering, your mistakes, even your loneliness, they can be turned into fuel for awakening. This kind of joy comes the moment you realize you are no longer just surviving. You're walking a path that leads somewhere real. And with that realization, something inside loosens. A heavy knot of confusion, self-doubt, or numbness that's been sitting there for years. You realize you're not broken. You were just never taught how to use your mind the right way. That is the first transformation. It's not dramatic on the outside, no fireworks. But inside, it's like a bell being struck in a silent room. A kind of gladness you didn't know you were missing begins to rise, not loud, but steady. This joy isn't selfish. It doesn't pull you away from others. It makes you want to help them more. It's not the joy of "I'm free." It's the joy of we can all be free. And that's when resilience begins to grow. Because once you taste this joy, your reason for staying grounded no longer depends on what happens to you. It comes from what flows through you. But the path doesn't stop there. As you keep walking, you begin to see how many of your habits are built on confusion. Not because you're foolish, but because life trained you to protect yourself in ways that no longer work. You start to see the layers of mental noise you've been carrying: judgments, self-protection, comparison, pride. All the things you once used to feel safe now start to feel heavy. So you let go, not out of effort, but because it feels lighter not to carry them anymore. That's the next kind of strength you develop: purity. Not the kind from outside rules or dogma. It's the purity of no longer needing to lie to yourself. You stop justifying your pain. You stop chasing approval. You stop defending every opinion like it's a sword fight. Instead, you move through life like clear water, still, calm, reflective. You speak honestly, but kindly. You act without second-guessing. There's no need to impress or explain yourself all the time. There's just clarity. And here's the thing: when your intentions are clean, you no longer fear how people see you. That's a powerful kind of freedom. When your conscience is light, your steps become fearless. But purity isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it shakes you. You see things about yourself you didn't want to face, the ways you've avoided love, the ways you've avoided truth. So you keep going. Now the work gets deeper. This is where the path asks you to truly examine your motivations. You start to cut through spiritual pride, emotional numbness, and the need to be right. You start to see how your ego has even disguised itself as your higher self. This level of insight brings pain, yes, but it also brings power. You stop being fooled by surface emotions. You no longer react just because a feeling arises. You begin to observe thoughts without believing them. You notice urges, but they no longer control you. That's strength, the kind that doesn't flinch even when your old wounds try to speak loudly. Here, you learn the strength of patience, not passive patience, but powerful stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't mean do nothing, but means act from wisdom, not from reaction. This level of practice rewires your nervous system. It slows your anger before it catches fire. It softens your sorrow before it sinks you. You don't pretend life doesn't hurt, but you learn how to meet pain without being pulled under. From this place, your actions begin to carry more weight. Not heavy, burdensome weight, but meaning. Even the smallest things you do, a kind word, a moment of silence, the choice not to argue, they start to matter more. Because they come from a place of deeper awareness. Eventually, your view of reality starts to shift. You no longer see problems as interruptions. You start to understand that pain itself is a kind of mirror. Every difficult person, every heartbreak, every disappointment, all of them become teachers. This is where you step into what's called the fearless mind. You're not fearless because you never feel fear. You're fearless because you've stopped running. You face what's uncomfortable, not to fix it, but to understand it. That kind of resilience cannot be shaken by bad news, by loss, or by rejection. This isn't armor, it's transparency. You're no longer hiding behind anything. And here, something miraculous happens. The division between you and others begins to dissolve. You stop seeing people as me versus them. The judgments drop. You realize their pain is your pain, their joy, your joy. The lines blur, and what replaces them is compassion. But it's not weak, it's fierce, it sees clearly, it holds boundaries, it doesn't enable harm, but it also refuses to abandon anyone, not even yourself. This level of compassion can feel overwhelming at first. You might find yourself crying at things you once ignored, feeling deeply for people you used to criticize. It can hurt, but it also opens the heart in a way that's unshakable. From this depth, your resilience becomes almost invisible, like the roots of a tree. No one sees the effort anymore, but it's there, holding everything steady. You move through the world without needing applause, without needing to be right, without needing to win. But don't mistake that for apathy. Now, your mind becomes sharp, not aggressive, but awake. You see things clearly. You make decisions without overthinking. You spot manipulation, illusion, self-deception, and you don't fall for it. This clarity brings a different kind of power, a grounded confidence, not the loud kind, not the kind that boasts, the kind that simply is, like a mountain. You've stopped outsourcing your stability. You're not depending on praise, love, or control. You're anchored in something much deeper. Even pain becomes less personal. You no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, you ask, "What is this showing me?" And slowly, you stop needing to be the center of everything. That's when real wisdom arises. You see that everything you thought was solid is actually changing all the time. Every story, every fear, every desire, they all rise and fall like waves. And here's the secret. That's not bad news. That's liberation. Because once you see that nothing lasts forever, not your shame, not your mistakes, not your loneliness, you stop clinging. You become open. And from that openness, life flows more freely. Not because everything goes your way, but because you've stopped resisting what is. This is where your resilience becomes quiet, almost invisible. You start giving more. Not because you're trying to be good, but because it's your nature. Like a candle lighting other candles without losing its own flame. Even when you feel pain, even when life hits you hard, something inside stays untouched. You may cry, you may fall, but you rise differently. You rise with grace. This is the strength that doesn't shatter when plans collapse. It's the wisdom that whispers, "This too is part of it." It's not numbness, it's deep presence. At this stage, even identity becomes lighter. You're no longer holding on so tightly to your story. You begin to see yourself more like space than a solid thing. Spacious, vast, capable of holding anything without breaking. And still, you don't disappear from life. You return to the world with open eyes and open hands. You live with purpose, not because you need to prove something, but because love moves through you. You become someone who others feel calm around, someone who listens without judging, someone who walks into a room and brings peace with them, not by effort, but by presence. That's what the 10 Bhumis teach, not as rules, but as experiences. Inner shifts that happen when you stay on the path long enough, when you keep showing up, even when it's hard, even when no one sees, even when you're tired. And eventually, the line between resilience and awakening fades. Because the most awakened minds are not untouchable, they are deeply touchable. They cry, they feel, they break open. But they do not break down. They bend and bend and bend, and they still rise. That is the resilience you're building. Quiet, real, indestructible, and it's already inside you. All you're doing now is waking it up. And so the path continues. Once you've touched the kind of quiet strength that doesn't break when life does, something else begins to stir. A deeper question, not spoken aloud, but felt inside the bones. If resilience can be built, then why do the waves of despair still return? Why do old sorrows sneak back in even after you've healed? Why does time feel like both an enemy and a thief, stealing youth, repeating pain, dragging you back into the very patterns you thought you had escaped? This next step offers no surface comfort, but it holds one of the most powerful medicines for despair that Buddhist wisdom has ever revealed. It's not about fixing anything. It's about understanding time itself, not as a straight line you're trapped in, but as something far more mysterious, something alive, something rhythmic. The Kala Chakra teaches that time does not simply pass. Time moves like a wheel, and when you see through its movement, you stop trying to escape suffering and start seeing it as part of something much bigger than pain. At first, the mind resists this idea, especially if you were taught to fear time. Maybe you learned to panic as the clock ticks. Maybe you feel ashamed about aging. Maybe you carry regret for things you didn't do, or pressure to accomplish something before some imagined deadline. That's what linear time does. It binds you. It keeps you looking backward or forward, always somewhere else, always out of sync with the present. But the Kala Chakra reveals something else entirely. It shows that time is not a straight road with an end. It is a turning, a movement, a dance, and you are not separate from it. You are it. Understanding cyclical time changes your relationship with suffering, because now, instead of thinking, "Why is this happening again?" you begin to see that everything in life moves in seasons. Not just the weather, not just the sky, your emotions too. Your fears, your habits, your dreams, they rise and fall. They come, they stay, and they pass. Not because something went wrong, but because that is the rhythm of reality. Just like the moon doesn't stay full, just like night doesn't last forever, no mental state is permanent. Even despair has a season. Even numbness has an end. Even the tight grip of anxiety must loosen, not because you force it, but because it is part of time's turning wheel. This kind of wisdom doesn't always feel like relief at first. It demands patience. It asks you to stop clinging to good times and stop fearing the difficult ones. It asks you to trust the unfolding of life, even when it makes no sense. But the moment you stop seeing pain as something gone wrong and start seeing it as part of a larger movement, you create space. Not just mental space, but spiritual spaciousness. You're no longer cramped inside your own panic. You can breathe again. Kala Chakra also teaches that just as the outer world moves in cycles, years, seasons, planetary phases, your inner world moves the same way. It's not random. It's not chaos. The body follows its own cycles. The breath moves in and out. Thoughts rise and fall. Even your spiritual growth follows a pattern. Expansion, contraction, clarity, confusion, insight, forgetting, then remembering again. These are not mistakes. These are signs you're alive. And alive means moving. When despair hits, it often feels permanent. It tricks you into thinking this moment is final, this feeling is the truth, and nothing will ever change. But the wheel keeps turning. The moment you begin to trust that turn, not mentally but deeply in your heart and body, you become unshakable in a different way. Not because you're above suffering, but because you're inside the rhythm, not fighting against it. You become like water. You follow the curve of the path, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. And here's what most people miss. The Kala Chakra doesn't just say that time is cyclical. It says that you are time, not a piece of it, not just moving through it. You are a reflection of the cosmic wheel. Every breath you take echoes the turning of galaxies. Every rise and fall of your emotion mirrors the rise and fall of worlds. This is not metaphor, it's direct experience. When meditators deeply realize this, something profound happens. They stop identifying with the temporary. They stop panicking when life changes, and they stop attaching their identity to what is always shifting. That's when inner peace becomes real. But this isn't about detachment in the cold, distant sense. It's not about being numb. It's about being fully here. So here that you see every moment as part of a sacred pattern. Even the ones that ache. Even the ones that shake you. You don't have to like pain to respect its place. Just like winter isn't as easy to love as spring, but it still brings clarity, rest, and transformation. That's what the Kala Chakra teaches. Every moment has its place, even the heavy ones. This kind of perspective doesn't just help during major life events. It becomes a quiet anchor during everyday struggles. When someone says something hurtful, instead of reacting, you feel the turn of the wheel. You know this sting will pass. When you wake up anxious, instead of collapsing into dread, you remember this feeling is a wave. It will rise, it will crash, it will soften. And when you feel joy, you don't cling to it like it's your last breath. You let it fill you and then let it go, knowing more will come. Always, more will come. This is a different kind of stability, not based on control, not built on prediction. It's grounded in surrender, but not the weak kind of surrender, the strong kind. The kind where you stop fighting time and start flowing with it, even when it's dark, even when it's cold. Because you've seen enough turns of the wheel to know no storm lasts forever, and no feeling defines your future. Kala Chakra also holds a teaching that touches your personal timeline in a very direct way. It says the past is not behind you and the future is not ahead. They are both right here within this moment. Your current awareness contains the seeds of all past actions and all future potential. So what you do with this breath, this one, shapes more than you know. That doesn't mean pressure, that means possibility. Even when things seem stuck, the wheel is still moving. Even when you feel lost, time is still creating space for you to grow. And this doesn't mean passivity. This doesn't mean you sit and wait for change. It means you align with change. You understand timing. You stop trying to force doors open when it's winter inside. You stop rushing healing that needs quiet. You don't push the river. You learn when to act and when to rest, when to speak and when to listen, when to move and when to stay still. That discernment is not weakness, it's mastery. There's a grace in this kind of living, a softness that comes not from giving up, but from tuning in. You start to sense when the season of grief is turning into the season of insight. You feel when your anger begins to fade and courage starts to rise. And instead of trying to make everything happen at once, you trust the unfolding. You know that even in the quietest days, something in you is being prepared. Nothing is wasted, not even the waiting. Kalachakra also points to something bigger than your own life. It reminds you that all beings are turning with the same wheel, that the suffering you feel, someone else is feeling too. That the joy you carry, someone else needs to see it, feel it, be reminded it's possible. You're not spinning alone. Every life, every story, every breath, part of the same rhythm, part of the same unfolding. When you hold that truth in your awareness, despair loses its grip. You stop feeling so isolated inside your pain. You become connected, not by words, but by presence. You also begin to forgive differently, not because people always deserve it, but because holding on to anger slows the turn of your own wheel. You stop feeding resentment. You stop clinging to what broke you. You don't forget. But you stop resisting what already happened. And that frees you. That lets your life keep turning. Even your mistakes become part of the teaching, not just because you learned from them, but because they happened within time's rhythm. They arose when they did, because they had to. Maybe you weren't ready yet. Maybe something had to break before you could rebuild with truth. Maybe the wheel had to turn through shadow before it could move into light. That's not an excuse. That's clarity. And clarity is what makes healing stick. Eventually, this way of seeing time begins to transform your sleep, your speech, your energy. You stop rushing. You breathe deeper. You speak with more care. You give yourself more space to be human. You stop demanding perfection. You begin to treat your emotions like weather, not as enemies, not as gods, but as signals, and like all weather, they pass. There's something unshakable in a person who sees life this way. They are not immune to pain, but they are not trapped by it. Their joy is deeper, their presence is richer, their silence speaks louder than most people's shouting. They're grounded not because they found some perfect answer, but because they accepted time as their teacher, not their enemy. And when it's time to let go of a dream, of a person, of a season of life, they do it with respect, not with bitterness, not with denial, with full awareness of the wheels turning, with deep trust that what is falling away is making room for something new, even if that new thing hasn't arrived yet, even if they never see it. Still, they trust the rhythm. This is the resilience of the Kalachakra, a resilience not built on resistance, but on alignment, not on force, but on rhythm. It teaches you to meet life where it is, not where you wish it were. It teaches you to ride out the storm with open eyes, open hands, and a steady breath, because you know this moment is not the end, it is only a turn, and the wheel always turns. That's how despair loses its sharpness. Not by avoiding it, but by holding it in the light of time's eternal rhythm, not with fear, but with presence. And not just presence, but peace. Even after you've come to trust the turning of the wheel, even after you've learned to move with the rhythms of time and seen that pain does not last, something deeper begins to rise. A subtle tension, a quiet question, a discomfort that no season seems to end. You begin to ask not just when suffering ends, but why it happens at all. Not just how to move through emotions, but what they're really made of. There is a kind of fatigue that arrives when you've walked long enough through healing and still find the world pulling you back into confusion. You start to wonder if there's something more foundational to see, not just about the path, but about the nature of reality itself. This is where the view of emptiness enters. Not the kind of emptiness that feels cold or lifeless, not numbness, not giving up, but the kind of emptiness that frees you from the tight grip of every false idea you've ever carried about who you are, what the world is, and what it means to suffer. This is the wisdom of Madhyamaka, the middle path, which teaches that everything you experience, everything you believe to be solid, separate, fixed, is not what it appears to be. It's not that nothing exists. It's that nothing exists independently, by itself, from its own side. Everything you experience arises through causes, conditions, context, perception. Not one thing stands alone, not even you. And far from being a depressing idea, this is the root of freedom, because if nothing is fixed, then nothing is doomed. If identity is not solid, then trauma is not final. If your thoughts are not inherently real, then you don't have to believe every one of them. When you first hear that things are empty, the mind wants to resist. It feels too strange. It can sound like denial. But this view isn't about ignoring what's real. It's about seeing more clearly how reality functions. Emptiness means that everything is interdependent, and interdependence means everything is changeable. That's where resilience begins, not in controlling what happens, but in knowing that no event, no self, no fear, no failure is a fixed truth. Everything is relational. Everything is open. So when you're hurting, the view of emptiness teaches you not to hold on to the pain as mine or as a permanent state. The pain is happening. Yes. But it's happening because of conditions, physical, emotional, mental, karmic. And those conditions are moving. You don't have to fight the experience, but you also don't have to be trapped in the idea that the experience is you. That space between what arises and what you believe about it is where liberation begins. Take anger. Normally, when it appears, it feels personal. It feels righteous. It takes over. But if you pause and look, where is the anger? Can you find a fixed core to it? Is it just the words in your head, the tightness in your chest, the memory that triggered it, the situation that seems unfair? It's all those things, and yet none of them by themselves. The anger is a dependent event. It doesn't exist from its own side. It arises like a flame from fuel, heat, air, and if any one of those is missing, it fades. That's not theory. That's a direct way to practice. The same is true for identity. You might carry the idea that you are broken, or not good enough, or that you've failed too many times. But what is that idea made of? Is it your thoughts? Is it memories? Is it feelings? Is it other people's judgments? Every time you try to pin it down, it shifts. That's not because you're vague, it's because the idea of self is built from pieces that are not solid on their own. This is good news, because if the self isn't fixed, then your past doesn't define your future. Then your mistakes don't define your worth. Then your roles, parent, partner, professional, healer, seeker, are just labels, useful in context, but not the full truth. This understanding makes you mentally untouchable, not because nothing affects you, but because nothing can hold you hostage. You start to live with less grasping, less clinging, less fear of what will be taken from you. When you know that nothing has an unchanging essence, you stop trying to preserve what was never stable in the first place. That's not apathy, that's maturity. You still care deeply, you still love fully. But you don't bind yourself to fantasies of permanence. Even suffering becomes more workable, because when something hurts, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start looking at the conditions. You become a quiet investigator of your own life. You see how thoughts reinforce feelings, how environments trigger reactions, how your beliefs create emotional responses, and instead of collapsing into the emotion, you step back into clarity. You still feel, but you don't drown. This view also changes how you relate to others. Instead of reacting to someone as if they are one fixed identity, you see them as moving, complex, impermanent beings. They too are empty of inherent existence, which means they too are not reducible to one moment, one mistake, one version of themselves. That doesn't mean you allow harm, but it does mean you hold less resentment. You see that even cruelty arises from causes, ignorance, pain, fear, and that seeing lets you soften, not in weakness, but in wisdom. This wisdom also cuts through spiritual confusion. Many people walk a path of self-improvement while secretly carrying the idea that one day they'll arrive, that there will be a version of themselves that is pure, peaceful, enlightened, and permanent. But the view of emptiness gently removes that illusion. There is no solid version of you to become. There is only this unfolding process, this shifting, responding, waking up that happens breath by breath. Freedom isn't found by perfecting the self. It's found by seeing through the self. That doesn't mean you disappear. It means you stop clinging to the idea of being one thing, in one way, forever. And that gives you room to change. It gives you space to fail and learn and begin again, not as a flaw, but as part of the path. Madhyamaka also helps you see that the world is not built from objects, but from relationships. A chair is only a chair because someone built it, someone named it, someone uses it. It's wood, its shape, its function, but it's not inherently chair. That word, that meaning, that reality, all depend on perspective. And the same is true for success, for love, for loss, for identity. These are not independent truths. They are patterns of experience. When you stop treating them as fixed, you stop giving them the power to control your peace. Even emotions shift in this light. Anxiety becomes less of a prison and more of a wave. Grief becomes less of a trap and more of a process. Joy becomes less of a treasure to cling to and more of a passing wind to enjoy. You're not detaching from life. You're meeting it more clearly, without fantasy, without fixation. One of the most powerful results of this practice is inner spaciousness. Not emptiness in the sad sense, but emptiness as fullness. When you are no longer bound to fixed views, There's more room inside you, more creativity, more openness, more silence that doesn't feel hollow, but feels awake. That silence is not absence. It's freedom. Freedom from the pressure to prove anything. Freedom from the chase. Freedom from needing every part of life to go your way in order to feel okay. You begin to carry a kind of effortless resilience, the kind that doesn't come from hardening yourself, but from softening into the truth. You don't need to hold yourself up so tightly. You don't need to argue with every thought. You don't need to resist change, because you've seen that nothing holds still, and that's not a threat. That's grace. This view also prepares you for death, not as a fearful end, but as a continuation of change. Just as the self is empty of fixed existence, so is the boundary between life and death. What you call you has never been one thing. It has been moments, perceptions, patterns. So when this body ends, the story doesn't end. The movement continues, not in a way that needs belief, in a way that reflects how everything you've ever experienced has already been movement. Understanding emptiness doesn't mean you stop living. It means you stop carrying weight you never needed. You stop needing the world to validate your worth. You stop defining your peace by your circumstances. You start being with what is, fully, fearlessly, fluidly, and perhaps most importantly, you stop searching for a solid ground. Because now you realize the ground is the movement itself. Security doesn't come from holding still. It comes from knowing how to dance with the changing. And once you see that, really see it, nothing can steal your peace. Not loss, not change, not even fear itself. Because you know, nothing is born in the way you thought. Nothing stands alone. And in that emptiness, everything becomes possibility. When you begin to experience life through the lens of emptiness, something inside loosens. You stop believing in the solidity of thoughts, roles, fears, even identities. You no longer feel trapped in your own mind, but emptiness on its own is not the end. It creates space, a powerful silence. But the question arises, what fills that space now? What lives in the place where the ego once held center stage? The next layer of the path doesn't come as a gentle whisper. It doesn't comfort you with soft words or calming promises. It arrives with fire, with teeth, with a force that does not negotiate. This is where the dakinis enter. Not as myth or symbol, but as direct reflections of the energy inside you that refuses to let you hide anymore. In Vajrayana, the dakini is not just a figure in a painting or a story from the past. She is the living embodiment of wisdom that cuts through illusions with terrifying clarity. She is fierce because your defenses are thick. She is wrathful because your ego is stubborn. But her fury is never for destruction. It is the kind of fierce love that tears you open so that your true self, the one buried beneath years of numbness and pretending, can finally breathe. Her bone ornaments aren't decorations. They are reminders of death, the kind you experience when your old self collapses, when your coping mechanisms stop working, when your spiritual masks crack. The dakinis do not comfort the ego. They challenge it. They mock it. They burn it down. And if you're ready to face them, they will show you the kind of resilience that cannot be shaken by any outer crisis, because it's been born directly from inner death. This path doesn't begin with peace. It begins with discomfort. It begins when the emotional structures you relied on begin to fall apart. You might feel raw, exposed, shaken. This is not a mistake. This is the initiation. The dakinis arrive when you're no longer able to pretend, when silence feels louder than noise, when every attempt to control your emotions backfires. They come when your old strategies, shutting down, explaining away, spiritual bypassing, start to feel like poison instead of protection. And this is exactly where the transformation starts. The dakinis show you that your pain, your fear, your shame, none of it needs to be fixed or erased. It needs to be met fully. Wrathful energy doesn't mean aggression. It means uncompromising truth. It means no more running, no more stories, no more hiding behind politeness or spiritual performance. The dakini teaches through disruption. She teaches by pressing directly into the place you most want to avoid and refusing to look away. She teaches by pulling your deepest emotional patterns into the light and daring you to stay present. In many traditional texts, dakinis are described dancing in cremation grounds. This isn't poetry. This is the truth of practice. The cremation ground is your inner world when everything familiar has died, when the old roles no longer fit, when your ambitions lose meaning, when relationships break, when emotions burn without relief. This is the place most people try to escape. But the dakini dances here because she knows that in this exact space, the ego is weakest and truth is most available. She wears bone ornaments because she has no fear of death, not physical death, but the death of illusion. The death of control, the death of identity as a possession. She wears what you try to avoid, and she wears it with pride. This isn't to glorify suffering. It's to reveal that on the other side of what you fear most is the kind of clarity and strength you never knew you were capable of. Her dance isn't gentle, but it's medicine. You learn from her by letting go of the idea that you're supposed to feel okay all the time. You learn by facing the emotions that have been buried, the grief you never processed, the rage you tried to silence, the longing you masked with logic. The dakini energy doesn't ask for perfection. It demands honesty, not a performance of strength, a surrender into rawness. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop resisting what hurts, it begins to change. Not because you fixed it, but because you met it fully. Dakini wisdom is not about controlling emotions. It's about letting them complete their process without attaching a story, without turning away. It's about learning to sit in the fire until something deeper emerges. Not a better version of you, not a cleaner identity, but the absence of identity, the space where presence itself is enough. This energy also transforms your relationship with power, not external power, influence, control, image, but internal power. The ability to stay grounded in the face of chaos, the ability to feel without collapsing, the ability to move through intensity with clarity. Wrathful wisdom doesn't make you louder. It makes you unshakably clear. Your words become sharper. Your boundaries become cleaner. Your presence becomes magnetic, not because you force it, because it's no longer weighed down by false self-images. There's a reason this path isn't taught lightly. It asks everything of you. It asks you to let go of your favorite lies. It asks you to stop blaming the world for your suffering. It asks you to stand in front of your own mind with nothing to hide behind. And in return, it gives you a kind of freedom that is terrifying in its depth, because it's not about safety. It's about full participation, full embodiment, full awareness, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's overwhelming. The Dakini path is not linear. It comes in waves. One moment you feel clear and strong. The next, everything collapses. This is part of the transmission. You are being trained in resilience that includes emotional death, the ability to dissolve and still remain conscious, to fall apart and still trust that awareness is intact, to be nothing and feel no lack. This wisdom also disrupts the gendered ideas we carry. Dakini energy is described as feminine, but it lives in all beings. It is the wisdom that comes not from controlling, but from allowing, not from separation, but from merging, not from hardening, but from softening into raw intensity. It doesn't reject logic, but it doesn't depend on it. It moves through sensation, intuition, embodiment, direct experience. It burns what cannot stay. It reveals what cannot be spoken. It teaches not through concepts, but through direct contact with reality. For many, this kind of wisdom only becomes available after a breakdown, a loss, a betrayal, a shock. The moment when the polished identity can no longer hold, and though it feels like the end, it's actually an opening. The Dakinis step in right there when everything feels ruined and say, "Good, now we begin." What you thought was destruction turns out to be initiation. What you feared was weakness becomes the entrance into power that doesn't need explanation. But this path is not wild for the sake of chaos. The Dakini teaches precise awareness, presence that sees through masks, insight that refuses to look away, fierce love that does not tolerate self-deception. The fire isn't random, it's sacred, and it always burns away what's false to reveal what's real. You may find that old emotions begin to resurface, not to punish you, but to complete their movement. You may feel intense grief, shame, rage, longing. These are not problems. These are unfinished cycles. The Dakini path teaches you how to stay with the wave, how to meet emotion as energy, not identity. You stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and start asking, "What's here and what wants to move?" That shift changes everything. As you deepen in this, your body becomes part of the practice. Not something to escape, not something to fix, but a field of wisdom, a space where insight arises through sensation. Your chest tightens. There's something unspoken. Your stomach clenches. There's something unprocessed. Your hands shake. Something wants release. The Dakini teaches you to listen with your whole being, not to diagnose, not to suppress, to feel fully. And from that feeling, fierce clarity grows. You begin to speak truths you once buried. You set boundaries you once avoided. You stand in spaces you once shrank from, not to prove anything, but because anything else would be a lie. Your presence starts to carry fire, not loud, not aggressive, just unmistakably awake. People might feel uncomfortable around it. That's okay. Your job is not to be palatable. Your job is to be real. To walk as one who has passed through fire and come back not with ashes, but with light. You become a reflection of what is possible, a person who has died many small deaths and still rises, clear-eyed, soft-hearted, uncompromising. And you begin to guide others, not by teaching, but by being. Your presence says, you can fall apart and live. You can feel deeply and not lose yourself. You can face what terrifies you and come through radiant. That is the Dakini gift. Not escape, not comfort, transmutation. She doesn't give answers. She gives you back to yourself. Without illusion, without denial, without pretense. And in that raw, honest place, you meet the deepest kind of resilience. Not the kind that survives in spite of pain, the kind that is born through it. And when the next storm comes, you don't run, you don't harden. You stand where you are, stripped of everything false, and you burn, quietly, fiercely, freely. There's a moment after the burning ends, after the fire has done its work, after your defenses have melted, after the raw truth of Dakini wisdom has stripped away what no longer belongs. What's left is quiet. Not peace in the shallow sense, but the silence that comes after surviving yourself. And in that silence, something new begins to stir. Not a return to normal, not the rebuilding of an old self, but a subtle joy. The kind that doesn't depend on comfort, the kind that doesn't rise from gain. It's the joy that exists right at the edge of nothing. The joy of being untouched, even when the body is broken. The joy of being alive, even when there's nothing left to hold on to. This kind of joy has a name and a song and a story. Milarepa lived it. He didn't learn resilience from books or teachings in grand monasteries or safe communities. He lived alone in mountain caves, starving, rejected, misunderstood, barely clothed, barely breathing. But through all that hardship, he laughed, he sang. He didn't rise above his suffering. He walked through it singing. His story isn't a legend meant to inspire with fantasy. It is a mirror for what is possible when everything external is stripped away and the spirit, untouched by circumstance, begins to shine from within. Milarepa didn't start out a saint. His path began in darkness. He had caused harm. His guilt was heavy. His body was weak. His karma, as he described it, was terrifying. He went to his teacher, not seeking enlightenment, but forgiveness, and even there he was tested with labor and silence and long delays. But he stayed, and he kept going, not because he believed he deserved a reward, but because something deeper was pulling him forward, a desire to transform, not escape. The cave became his teacher. The hunger became his mirror. The solitude became his field of practice, and through it all, he did something few can. He opened his mouth and sang, not to perform, not to distract himself, but because truth was rising from his chest and needed to be spoken in sound. His songs weren't soft, they were raw, clear, full of insight and surrender. He wasn't singing despite his pain. He was singing with it. This is the lesson few modern seekers understand. Resilience isn't always about pushing through. Sometimes it's about finding the song inside your starvation, not waiting for healing to begin, but letting wisdom speak through the suffering itself. Milarepa's body grew thin, but his heart became vast. His senses faded, but his clarity expanded. When the world offers you nothing, the teachings become direct. When there's no escape, the mind has to turn inward. And when it turns inward, what it finds is not just emptiness, but luminous awareness, awareness that can't be broken by lack. He sang of mountains, rivers, wind, and sky. But he wasn't describing nature, he was speaking to his own mind. The cave walls became reflections of his inner landscape. The snowstorms taught him patience. The wild animals taught him humility. The long nights taught him how to sit still in the unknown. And his voice, shaped by these teachings, became not just sound. It became a medicine, a way to digest hardship, a way to meet life as it was, not how he wished it would be. There's a hidden strength that only comes through aloneness, not loneliness, which is rooted in lack, but sacred solitude, the kind that strips away all roles, all stories, all distractions. In that solitude, the mind no longer has anywhere to run. The thoughts that once dominated begin to dissolve. The fears that once shouted begin to whisper. The desire to be someone is replaced by the presence of simply being. Milarepa didn't overcome solitude. He became it, and in becoming it, he found the root of spiritual power. Complete non-dependence on anything external to awaken what's already inside. His story reveals something uncomfortable but liberating, that the body's limits do not define the mind's potential. When there's no food, no comfort, no praise, the ego loses its grip, and what's left is something unshakable. Milarepa's resilience didn't come from enduring hardship with gritted teeth. It came from transforming hardship into wisdom by using every part of it. Hunger became clarity. Cold became meditation. Rejection became devotion. His mind stopped resisting reality and started dancing with it. This doesn't mean you need to starve yourself or live in a cave, but the principle is universal. When you meet your limits fully, without turning away, without numbing out, without reaching for distraction, you discover an inner current that doesn't rely on circumstance. Most people only touch it in fragments, during deep loss, illness, betrayal, moments where the world pulls the floor out from under them. And in those moments, there's often a glimpse of something still, something awake, something strangely joyful beneath the pain. Milarepa lived in that space full time, not because he was special, but because he let go of everything else. Joy, in this view, is not an escape from suffering. It is the shining that appears when you stop arguing with what is. When the mind opens fully to this moment, no matter how harsh it is, there is light. Not comfort, not certainty, but light. His laughter came not from denial, but from insight. Insight into the futility of clinging, the emptiness of pride, the joke of chasing worldly success. He laughed because he saw through it. He sang because there was nothing left to protect. He lived in truth, not because it was easy, but because everything else had burned away. There's a strength that's born from this kind of honesty. The strength to be with your own mind, hour after hour, year after year. No distractions, no affirmations, no one cheering you on, just presence, just practice, just a steady willingness to stay with what's here. Most people try to fill the silence. Milarepa became the silence, and from that silence his voice returned, not to beg, not to blame, but to express the raw beauty of a spirit that has died 1,000 small deaths and come back softer, freer, more alive. Milarepa's teachings are not written in complicated theory, they're sung in plain words. Words from a starving man with a radiant mind. Words that cut through illusion because they were born in solitude, not theory. He didn't sing to escape pain. He sang to welcome it, to learn from it, to make it sacred. And in doing so, he transformed his life into a message. Nothing external can stop you from awakening if your heart is ready to surrender fully. This is the core of his resilience. Radical self-responsibility, complete openness to difficulty, a devotion to truth so deep that even suffering became part of the offering. He never blamed his fate. He didn't ask for an easier path. He used what was given, even karma, even regret, even cold wind against a starving body, and that's what made his joy so pure. It wasn't dependent on circumstances improving. It was a joy that arrived because he met the moment completely, without armor. His songs are not about overcoming. They are about entering the depth of life as it is, entering the pain until it opens, entering the fear until it softens. He didn't sing because he felt strong. He sang because he was willing to be vulnerable, willing to be nobody, willing to lose everything in order to find something unshakable. His path shows that solitude doesn't destroy you, it refines you. That hunger doesn't weaken the spirit, it clarifies it. That isolation isn't punishment, it's preparation. When no one else is watching, when no one else is helping, when the noise is gone and only your breath remains, you discover what kind of strength you really carry. And you discover that joy, real joy, doesn't need a reason. Milarepa's resilience was not loud. It was not impressive in worldly terms. But it was absolute. The kind of strength that doesn't need approval. The kind of freedom that doesn't depend on comfort. The kind of joy that survives not because it avoids pain, but because it includes it. He teaches that your power is not in controlling life, but in surrendering fully to it. When you stop demanding that life be easy and start showing up for it exactly as it is, a transformation happens. The kind of transformation that doesn't make you invincible, but makes you real. That doesn't protect you from sadness, but lets you walk with it without breaking. That doesn't remove fear, but keeps you steady within it. Milarepa's story isn't a fantasy of superhuman strength. It's an invitation to stop waiting for perfect conditions, to stop fearing your own depths, to stop hiding from the truth of your experience. His laughter came from clarity. His songs came from surrender. His power came from presence. And all of that is possible for you too, not by copying his life, but by meeting your own with the same raw honesty and devotion. When you do, something starts to rise. A quiet joy that doesn't depend on anything changing. A strength that isn't loud, but lasts. A voice that starts to sing again. Not because everything is easy, but because you finally see that even in the hardest moments, your spirit is still here, still breathing, still shining, and that is enough. After the songs have faded and the silence returns, there is a shift that follows. Not just in the body or the heart, but somewhere deeper in how you see the world itself. You've faced the fire, you've sat in the cave, you've tasted the kind of joy that doesn't depend on gain or escape. But even now, something lingers. A question that presses beneath the surface when grief rises again, when loss hits without warning, when life feels suddenly unfair. It's not about how to survive difficulty anymore. It's about why it keeps happening at all, why certain patterns repeat, why pain sometimes follows you no matter how much you've healed, why even after clarity, something still aches. This is where the teachings turn toward time again, not as seasons or cycles of the outer world, but as the vast river of consciousness itself. The idea that you were not born for the first time in this life, that your story did not begin with your name or your body, that your mind has moved lifetime after lifetime through experiences so many you cannot remember them, but they live inside you. Belief in rebirth isn't a fantasy or an escape. It is a tool that radically reshapes how you meet suffering. Because when you no longer see this life as the full story, the pressure to explain every loss or justify every trauma begins to lift. Things can be hard without being final. Pain can be sharp without being unfair. Mistakes can be deep without being your entire identity. Karma begins to make sense, not as punishment, but as cause and effect playing out over time. You start to see that what happens in this life is not always the result of what this version of you did. Sometimes it is what another version left behind, and instead of being crushed by that idea, you begin to feel a strange freedom. Because if you've lived before, and if you'll live again, then you are much more than the one moment you are in now. This isn't meant to excuse harm or bypass accountability. It's meant to widen the lens, to give you space, to let you breathe when things feel like too much. Because when you remember that your mind stream didn't begin here, you stop believing that this one chapter defines your whole story. Trauma begins to lose its grip, not because you deny it, but because you see it as a scene, not the whole book. You become less afraid of what you're going through because you realize you've gone through many lives already, and something in you keeps choosing to return, to learn, to grow, even when it's hard. Rebirth reframes catastrophe. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the loss that once felt unbearable now takes its place in a much larger picture. Maybe you came here to experience this exact moment so you could learn what strength feels like when you rise again. Maybe this suffering is not punishment, but an opening, a way to deepen your capacity for compassion, to burn away layers of fear, to remember something that the easy moments never could have taught you. With this view, resilience is no longer a reaction. It becomes a purpose. You stay not because you have to, but because you chose to. Somewhere, on a level beyond conscious memory, your mind stream carried you here with intent. This doesn't mean you should stop grieving. It means grief becomes something sacred, something that connects lifetimes. When you cry now, perhaps it is not just for this life, but for all the pain your consciousness has witnessed. And when you heal now, perhaps it is not just your healing, but a ripple that moves both backward and forward through the stream. In this view, your choices matter even more, because every thought, every word, every action becomes a seed, not just for what happens next month, but for what happens in lives you haven't even touched yet. You begin to treat your present moments with greater care. You notice what you're planting in your mind. You stop feeding thoughts that bind you to confusion. You become more honest, more patient, more intentional, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Because this life is not just a test, it's a field, and every action becomes part of the landscape you'll walk through later. Not in some distant place, but in a future version of this same unfolding mind. This way of seeing also brings peace when death draws close. Whether it's your own or someone you love, the finality loosens. Loss still hurts, but it's no longer an end. The relationship changes, but it doesn't disappear. You begin to sense that the connection you had, the love that was real, is not lost to the ground or swallowed by the sky. It travels, it moves, the threads remain. Maybe they return, maybe they continue in another form, but nothing is wasted. This view also breaks the illusion that people are simple. If someone harms you, you can begin to ask, what karma must be playing out here? What old debt is being cleared? That doesn't mean you tolerate abuse. It means you respond with more insight, more discernment, less confusion. You stop needing every injustice to make sense right now. You trust that some lessons unfold across lifetimes, and some answers are only revealed much later. In moments of deep suffering, the belief in a mind stream that continues beyond this body can become a lifeline, not because it promises a better life later, but because it helps you find meaning in this one. Meaning not in abstract ideas, but in how you show up today, in how you carry yourself when no one is watching, in how you choose to respond when your expectations are shattered. Your mind stream is shaped every moment you breathe, and the way you meet the most painful chapters, how you love through them, how you endure them, how you speak during them, determines not just what you experience now, but what consciousness becomes next. This makes your pain less lonely, because you start to sense that every struggle you face now was once carried by someone else. Maybe even by you in another life. Maybe the strength you're building now is exactly what you'll need later, when another version of you stands at another crossroads. This is not fantasy. This is cause and effect. The unfolding of consciousness over vast time. And this deep time perspective also reshapes how you forgive. You might start to see that the person who hurt you isn't evil. They're caught in their own karmic web. And if you add more anger, more harm, more resentment, the web only grows. But if you respond with clarity, with compassion, with wisdom, even if from a distance, you interrupt the cycle. You shift the stream, and that small shift may ripple into places you'll never see. You also begin to understand why certain emotions are so persistent, why some fears feel older than your memory, why some longings seem to come from beyond anything you've lived, because maybe they do. The mind stream carries impressions, habits, tendencies, and those don't reset when the body ends. They travel, they deepen, until they're met with awareness. So when old pain resurfaces, it's not a failure, it's an opportunity, not to judge, but to meet something ancient with presence, with stillness, with courage. This courage, over time, becomes your resilience, not the kind that tries to win, but the kind that stays clear in the storm. You stop needing life to be fair. You stop needing people to be perfect. You stop waiting for the world to give you peace. You realize peace is something you build with every breath, every choice, every thought, and you build it not just for now, but for all the versions of you that are still to come. With this view, the urgency shifts. You become more generous, not because you're trying to earn merit, but because you understand the ripple of kindness, how even one act of love can echo across lives. You become more disciplined, not out of guilt, but because you've tasted the weight of mindless karma. You become more forgiving, not as a moral duty, but as an offering to your future self. Because you know now, nothing disappears, everything returns. What you put into this moment shapes what returns to you next. And even when you doubt the theory, the practice still works. You don't have to be sure. You just need to hold space for the possibility that what feels unbearable now is not the whole picture, that what you do with your pain matters beyond what you can see, that healing, in even the smallest ways, carries forward, that every time you choose to stay kind, stay clear, stay honest, you are changing something far beyond this life. Over time, the fear begins to ease. Not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer trying to force meaning into a small container. You're living in a wider view, one that includes your ancestors, your future lives, every being who has ever suffered. And suddenly, you are not alone. You are not small. You are part of something vast and ancient and deeply alive. This perspective becomes your strength. When tragedy strikes, you grieve, but you don't collapse. When plans fail, you adjust, but you don't give up. When joy comes, you cherish it, but you don't cling. You move through time like a wave, not resisting, not grasping, not forgetting. You carry your karma with care, knowing that everything you do becomes part of what consciousness continues to carry. You are not afraid of this responsibility. You welcome it, because now you know how powerful you really are. Not because of what you control, but because of how you meet each moment as one part of a much larger unfolding where nothing is wasted and everything returns. When you begin to hold your life as part of a continuum, when you see your experience as threads in a vast weave of mind stream migration, something unexpected starts to happen. You stop trying to divide your inner world into good and bad. You stop needing to throw away your pain to feel clean. And in that quiet shift, you begin to wonder, what if the parts of you that feel darkest aren't mistakes? What if they are gateways? Not obstacles, but energy waiting to be reworked. Not poisons in the moral sense, but unrefined potential. This is where the practice deepens into transformation. Not avoidance, not suppression, but full inclusion. This is where you begin the work of turning your inner poisons into fuel. In Vajrayana, the 5 poisons are not condemned. They are studied, honored, even revered as raw energy that, when misunderstood, binds you, but when understood, unlocks wisdom. Anger, desire, envy, ignorance, and pride, these are not stains on your spirit. They are misunderstood movements of your own mind. And if you have the courage to stay with them, to stop pushing them away or acting them out, they begin to teach you something that cannot be learned through calm alone. Anger, for instance, burns. It tightens the chest, clouds the breath, pulses hot through the body. Most teachings say to calm it, to breathe through it, to let it go. But Tantrikas take a different approach. They don't let it take over, but they also don't dismiss it. They watch it, they listen, they hold it in the fire of attention. And what begins to appear is not just pain or rage, but clarity. Anger, in its essence, is the distortion of mirror-like wisdom. It comes when the truth has been ignored, when boundaries have been crossed, when integrity has been lost. Its heat comes from a deep knowing of rightness, not moral superiority, but a felt sense of alignment. When you learn to stay with anger without acting it out, it sharpens your awareness. It teaches you to see clearly, without projection, without denial. It becomes the sword that cuts through confusion. Desire is no less intense. It pulls at you, colors your perception, makes you grasp for something you think will complete you. Most spiritual paths tell you to detach from it, to see its emptiness. But the tantric view doesn't demand you stop wanting. It asks you to go deeper into the energy beneath the wanting. What is it really asking for? Not the object, but the feeling behind it. Often, it's not about having, but about connection, intimacy, unity. At its core, desire is the distortion of discriminating wisdom, the ability to see beauty, to make choices, to recognize value. When desire is transmuted, it becomes devotion, not clinging, but offering. Not obsession, but love that doesn't demand possession. It becomes the fire that fuels sacred commitment. Envy twists the heart, it contracts the mind, it compares, resents, calculates, it pretends to admire, but underneath it burns. Most people are ashamed of envy. They hide it, deny it, or justify it. But in tantric practice, envy is seen as misdirected intelligence. It arises when you perceive the qualities in others that you have not yet claimed in yourself. It's the shadow of potential. When transmuted, envy becomes all-accomplishing wisdom, the ability to rejoice in others' gifts and achievements without losing your center. It becomes inspiration instead of poison. A mirror showing you what is possible, a call to develop, not to diminish. Pride, when raw, builds separation. It tells you that you are above others, or sometimes below them, which is just the same pattern inverted. It makes you defend a fixed self-image. But underneath it lies the seed of the wisdom of sameness, the understanding that all beings, no matter their roles or states, share the same basic nature. Transmuted pride brings confidence without comparison, dignity without arrogance, groundedness that doesn't require hierarchy. It lets you walk with steadiness, not because you are better, but because you are no longer pretending. And then there is ignorance, the most subtle of the five. It doesn't feel fiery like the others. It's a fog, a dullness, a resistance to seeing clearly. It makes you forget what you are. It keeps you in loops, repeating the same behaviors, telling the same stories. It numbs you with comfort or distraction. But when met with awareness, it opens into the wisdom of vast space, the realization that there is nothing fixed, nothing to grasp, and therefore nothing to fear. Transmuted ignorance is not more knowledge. It's not more facts or theories. It's the direct recognition of mind's openness, the field in which all experience arises and dissolves. To work with these energies doesn't mean indulging them. It means facing them with precision and courage. You stop being afraid of your own depth. You stop needing to pretend you're already purified. You begin to understand that real strength comes from integrating what was rejected. The parts of you that once felt too dark, too loud, too wild. They are not the enemy. They are the parts that carry the most power when returned to wholeness. This process requires honesty. You need to know when you're lying to yourself. You need to be able to feel the impulse rising and pause before reacting. You need to name the pattern without shame. This is not easy work. It's not dramatic. It's daily, often silent, often uncomfortable. But every time you turn toward the poison instead of away, something shifts. The energy becomes less chaotic. The mind becomes less reactive. The heart opens a little more. One of the most powerful tools in this practice is visualization. Not as escape, but as a way to rewire perception. You learn to see your emotions not as failures, but as raw deities, wrathful or peaceful energies that, when seen clearly, teach you how to transform. You don't repress, you reshape. You don't escape the feeling, you digest it, metabolize it, turn it into something useful. Mantra also becomes essential, not just as sound, but as vibration that purifies the subtle body. When you chant a mantra associated with a specific wisdom aspect, you are calling forth that quality in yourself. You are reminding your body and mind of a deeper pattern. Over time, these patterns become stronger than the old habits. The nervous system begins to respond differently. The emotions still arise, but they don't take over. You experience them as visitors, not rulers. Breathwork supports this too, because the poisons live not only in the mind, but in the winds, the subtle energy currents in the body. When these are unbalanced, emotions become sticky, hard to release. But when breath and awareness are synchronized, those winds start to move. And as they move, the emotions move. Nothing gets stuck. Everything flows. This way of working also deepens your compassion. When you see that anger, desire, pride and envy are not wrong but untrained, you stop judging yourself so harshly, and by extension, you stop judging others. You start to recognize their struggle as familiar. You see their reactions not as threats, but as cries for help. You don't tolerate harm, but you respond from wisdom, not reactivity. Eventually, this practice becomes natural. You feel anger and recognize the call for clarity. You feel desire and sense the yearning for union. You feel envy and use it to motivate growth. You feel pride and return to your shared humanity. You feel dullness and open to space. The poisons stop controlling you. They become tools. Each emotion becomes a doorway to insight. Each reaction becomes a reminder to come home. And from this home, you act differently. Your presence carries less tension. Your speech becomes more precise. Your relationships become more honest. Not perfect, but more real. You're no longer trying to be good in the old sense. You're becoming whole. That wholeness includes light and dark, clarity and confusion, power and vulnerability. It includes your whole being. And the more you integrate, the less life can shake you. You're not trying to maintain a false image. You're grounded in something deeper than image. You've seen your own depths. You've stayed with them. You've made peace with them. And now you carry that peace into the world, not as performance, but as truth. This is not quick work. It takes years, sometimes lifetimes. But every moment you choose to stay with yourself instead of turning away, the alchemy is working. Every time you hold a difficult emotion with awareness instead of shame, the wisdom is growing. Every breath that meets fire without flinching brings you closer to freedom. And what's most remarkable is that this freedom doesn't take you away from life. It brings you deeper into it. You begin to taste the richness in all experience, even the painful parts. You see that nothing needs to be discarded, that everything belongs. that within the very poison is the seed of awakening. So you keep going. You stop seeking perfection. You start seeking truth. You welcome what arises. You meet it with clarity. You hold it in space, and in doing so, you walk the rare path, where poison becomes medicine, where shadow becomes light, and where even the most difficult emotions become your greatest teachers. After working with the poisons, after meeting the most intense parts of your mind without running or denying them, you begin to notice something surprising. The noise gets quieter. The push and pull, the stories, the emotional storms, they still come, but they don't land in the same way. You're no longer stuck inside every reaction. There's more space around what arises. And then another kind of door opens, not into emotion, not into thought, but into the space beyond both, where the usual structures of identity and experience begin to dissolve. It's not an escape. It's not numbness. It's the next stage of release, and it reveals the resilience that comes not from holding together, but from letting everything fall apart. This is the territory of the arupa jhanas, the formless absorptions. These are not mental states in the ordinary sense. They're not goals, and they're not achievements. They're shifts in how consciousness relates to experience. Each one unbinds the mind a little more from form, from self, from the assumption that what you see, think, and feel is all there is. And while they are often described as states reached through deep meditation, their real power lies not in how rare they are, but in what they teach about surrender. The first unbinding comes through the experience of infinite space. When the mind is still enough, stable enough, it stops relating to the body and thoughts as its reference point. What begins to expand is the sense of boundary, where your awareness begins and ends becomes unclear. Space becomes the object, not space like a concept or a mental image, but direct, felt openness. No edges, no walls, no center, just endless presence. This teaches something powerful. You are not contained by your skin, your roles, your stories. You are larger than the form you live in. And when you feel crushed by circumstances, that remembrance changes how you carry yourself. You stop folding in on your pain. You start expanding beyond it. But even space has a reference. And when the mind lets go of that reference, the next shift occurs. Infinite consciousness. Not awareness of space, but awareness of awareness itself. There's no object now, no location, just pure knowing. This knowing isn't thought. It's not analysis. It's not identity. It's the background hum of presence that exists even when all content fades. And in this state, you see that consciousness is not something you own. It's not yours. It's something that simply is, ungraspable, undivided, unending. When you've touched this, even briefly, you begin to see that you don't need to hold everything together. There is a continuity deeper than control, a stream of knowing that doesn't depend on outcomes. And then even that is let go. The next unbinding is nothingness, not nihilism, not absence. A direct experience of no thing, no objects, no definitions, no form, just absence of presence, not scary, not dark, neutral, still, untouched. When the mind becomes quiet enough, it realizes it doesn't need to be filled, that not everything has to be something. This level of surrender teaches the resilience of non-grasping, the strength that arises not from getting what you want, but from being okay with what is not. the ability to let go of ideas, expectations, even perception itself, and remain whole. Finally, the last door, neither perception nor non-perception. Here, the boundaries of experience become so subtle that the mind can no longer clearly say what is happening. There is awareness, but it's too refined to name. You are not perceiving in the usual way, but you're also not unconscious. This state cannot be described, only pointed to, and its lesson is radical. It shows you how little your survival depends on the narratives you cling to. That the self is not a fixed thing, but a fluid event. That identity is not required for presence, and that freedom is not something to build. It's what remains when everything else falls away. These formless states are not escapes from the world. They're rehearsals for death, not physical death, but the death of certainty, the death of ego, the death of clinging to form as the only reality. And in that rehearsal, you begin to trust something deeper than thought, something that doesn't break when form breaks. A kind of awareness that is not defined by having a body or a story or even a life as you've known it. What this teaches you in everyday life is profound. You stop reacting as if every experience is ultimate. You stop fighting to make everything permanent. You hold things more lightly, not because you don't care, but because you've seen the depth of what doesn't move. When people come and go, when success rises and falls, when emotions shift and change, you remain anchored, not in detachment, but in presence that doesn't depend on anything to be okay. This presence becomes a kind of refuge, not a withdrawal from the world, but a quiet confidence within it. You walk through difficulty with less reactivity. You hold space for others without losing yourself. You feel deeply, but don't drown. Because now you know there is a part of you that exists outside of thought, outside of reaction, outside of the drama of being someone. That part can't be harmed. It doesn't belong to any identity. It doesn't need praise or control. It just is. This insight makes space for a different kind of love. A love not based on form or agreement or mutual satisfaction, but love that arises simply because awareness recognizes itself in another. You start to meet people not as characters, but as currents of consciousness. You stop needing people to behave a certain way to feel safe. You stop needing outcomes to feel peace. You begin to love from freedom, not from need. The formless jhanas are not about transcendence. They are about training the mind to see what lies beneath surface experience, about teaching the body how to relax into spaciousness, about guiding the heart to trust in silence. They are not goals to achieve. They are directions to explore. They don't require perfect meditation. They require sincerity, a willingness to sit still, to let go, to stop chasing meaning long enough to hear what's underneath the noise. And what's underneath is not emptiness in the fearful sense. It is fullness without form, a richness that doesn't need content, a knowing that doesn't need words, a presence that doesn't need attention. When you touch this space, even briefly, it leaves an imprint. The next time life becomes chaotic, you remember. You remember that there is more than the visible, more than the measurable, more than the predictable. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. You act with clarity, not compulsion. You speak with care, not fear. You rest without guilt. You engage without losing your center. Because your identity is no longer hooked on form. It's no longer tied to who you're supposed to be. It's not even tied to who you think you are. It's resting in awareness itself, fluid, open, undivided. Even crisis feels different from this place. The usual sense of falling apart doesn't land in the same way, because part of you knows nothing solid is being lost. Only the illusion of solidity. What breaks is not the self, but the shell. What falls is not your essence, but the scaffolding. And so you let it fall. You let go, not as surrender, but as trust. Not because you have no choice, but because you finally see the wisdom in release. And over time, this changes everything. You begin to live more quietly inside. Not less alive, not less passionate, but less frantic. You start to recognize when the mind is clinging, and you know how to loosen that grip. You begin to notice when form becomes too heavy, and you learn how to step back into the spaciousness that holds it all. This spaciousness is not separate from life. It is what allows life to be experienced without contraction. It is what lets you feel everything fully without becoming overwhelmed. It is what lets you show up fully without burning out. Because you're not pouring from a limited container, you're drawing from the well of formless presence. And when you begin to live from this space, even the body changes. Breath becomes slower. Movements become more deliberate. The nervous system relaxes. You stop bracing against every change. You start flowing with change as part of the natural rhythm. You stop fearing endings. You start trusting beginnings. You stop needing everything to be known. You start finding safety in not knowing. This is the resilience of non-realm. The strength that comes not from holding on, but from letting go with awareness. The courage to stay awake even as identity dissolves. The wisdom to see through form without rejecting it. The love that remains even when all names have faded. The joy that arises not from experience, but from the space in which experience arises. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. But it is real. And it is available now. Not only in deep meditation, but in how you meet this moment. In how you soften your grip. In how you listen to silence. In how you allow space to be enough. This is the power of the Arupa jhanas, not to escape life, but to deepen your trust in what cannot be destroyed, to walk through the world without fear of loss, because you know what remains when everything else is gone. And in that knowing, there is peace. When form is no longer your anchor and awareness has learned to rest in formlessness, the body begins to return with new meaning. It's no longer a cage. It's no longer an identity. It becomes a vessel, a bridge between clarity and sensation, between space and embodiment. But even as the mind becomes more spacious, the body still holds patterns. Even as consciousness learns to let go, the winds that move within remain restless. The resilience that comes from stillness must now be carried into movement, breath, and sensation. The formless must enter form again, not as weight, but as wisdom. This is where the teaching of lung arises. In Tibetan tradition, lung refers to subtle wind energy. It is not the breath alone, but the internal force that carries thoughts, emotions, and awareness through the channels of the subtle body. It moves invisibly, but its effects are everywhere. It shapes the way you feel, the way you think, the way you react, the way your presence impacts the space around you. Lung can become wild when the mind is unsettled, when the body holds trauma, when fear becomes a cycle. But it can also be balanced, steadied, refined, and in that refinement, you discover a new kind of stability. Trauma doesn't only live in memories. It lives in the body's winds. It rides the breath, disrupts the nervous system, scatters attention, and contracts awareness. It distorts posture, fragments sleep, drains energy. Even long after the event has passed, the winds remain imprinted with its signal. So, to restore balance is not just a mental act, it is energetic. And it begins by learning how to feel lung, not conceptually, but directly. The way the chest feels tight when fear is unspoken, the way the belly contracts when anger is stored, the way the shoulders rise when control becomes a habit. The first resilience in this practice is recognizing where wind moves and where it stops. Practices to stabilize lung are precise. They are rooted in breath, posture, visualization, and presence. They are not physical exercises in the ordinary sense. They are subtle rituals that realign the body's energy flow with awareness. One of the foundational methods is gentle vase breathing. This involves inhaling slowly, holding the breath lightly in the lower belly without strain, and allowing awareness to rest in the stillness between breaths. When practiced regularly, this calms the winds, brings attention inward, and creates an internal sense of containment. The chaos in the mind begins to mirror the steadiness of breath. Thought becomes slower. Emotion becomes less overwhelming. This containment is not suppression, it is spacious holding. Lung cannot be forced into stillness, it must be invited. If you meet it with tension, it resists. If you meet it with precision and softness, it begins to settle. Like taming a wild animal, it requires consistency and calm. This is why posture matters. A relaxed spine, open chest, and grounded base allow lung to circulate without obstruction. When the posture is collapsed, wind energy becomes stuck. When the body is too rigid, it becomes restricted. Balance lies in alert relaxation. Another important method is ninefold purification breath. This practice works by directing the winds through different channels to clear imbalance. It involves alternating nostrils, using visualizations of colored light, and linking breath to intention. Each round purifies a specific channel, one related to anger, one to desire, one to ignorance. As the winds clear, the mind becomes less reactive. The energy becomes more focused. With repetition, this begins to repattern emotional tendencies. You no longer get pulled so easily into spirals of confusion or reaction. There's a little more space before the storm. Lung is also affected by speech. Every word you speak carries wind energy. Angry speech, even if whispered, agitates the winds. Fearful language, even inside your own mind, creates instability. Silence, when held with presence, restores balance. Mantra is one of the most powerful ways to work with wind, not only because of the sound, but because the vibration begins to reprogram the flow of subtle energy. The repetition of sacred syllables aligns body, breath, and awareness. It steadies the winds and creates a resonance that echoes through the channels. The longer the mantra is practiced, the deeper the imprint it leaves on the energetic body. Visualization also plays a role. You're not just calming breath. You're training the subtle body to hold the qualities of the visualization. When you see light moving through the channels or a deity seated at the heart, you are not imagining a fantasy. You are imprinting the nervous system with a new rhythm. The image is a form, but it points to a quality. When the quality is strong enough, the body begins to respond. The winds begin to move accordingly. One of the most challenging forms of lung imbalance is called lung disorder in traditional texts. It happens when wind becomes chaotic. This can look like anxiety, scattered thoughts, insomnia, emotional extremes, difficulty concentrating, or sudden fatigue. In modern terms, this might resemble trauma response, nervous system dysregulation, or even spiritual emergency. The antidote is not to think your way out. It is to work with the winds directly. Slow walking meditation with coordinated breath, gentle yoga rooted in stillness, self-massage with warm oil, all of these soothe the winds. The food you eat, the temperature around you, the time of day, all influence how wind behaves. Simple changes can have deep effects when approached with awareness. The resilience you gain from working with lung is subtle but transformative. You begin to feel more stable, not because your thoughts have changed, but because their fuel no longer controls you. You learn to sense agitation before it becomes emotion. You recognize what restlessness feels like before it hijacks your decisions. You understand that peace is not a passive absence of chaos, but an active regulation of energy. This doesn't make you immune to stress, but it changes how you recover. You bounce back faster. You don't get stuck in the same cycles. You recognize the signs early and know how to respond. This awareness begins to affect relationships. Because lung is contagious, the energy you carry influences the people around you. If your wind is chaotic, it adds to the noise. If your wind is steady, it invites others to soften. Your presence becomes medicine, not because you say the right thing, but because your energy communicates safety. This is not manipulation, it is integrity. When your winds are balanced, your actions align with clarity. Your attention stays steady in conversation. Your emotions don't leak. People feel it, even if they don't have the words for it. This also affects how you hold trauma, not by erasing it, but by changing your relationship to it. Trauma fragments the winds. It scatters presence. It traps awareness in parts of the body that become frozen. As you work with the subtle breath, those frozen places begin to melt. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gently. Like warmth returning to a cold limb. The body begins to trust again, and when the body trusts, the mind begins to follow. You also learn to recognize the difference between true intuition and wind distortion. Sometimes what feels like a gut feeling is actually a wind imbalance, a projection, a fear, a past imprint disguised as insight. But when the winds are clear, intuition is clean. It comes without emotional charge. It doesn't pull or push. It simply knows. And that knowing becomes a compass, not just for spiritual practice, but for daily life. Over time, you stop fearing the winds. You respect them. You understand their language. You see that every emotion is a message from the winds. Every reaction is a signal. You stop needing to silence them. You start listening. And in listening, you begin to guide them, not with force, but with awareness, not by control, but by tuning. This tuning becomes your anchor. When life is loud, you return to the breath. When thoughts are fast, you slow the exhale. When decisions feel cloudy, you align the posture. When fear rises, you place the awareness in the lower belly. You work not just with the mind, but with the engine beneath it, and that is where the real shift happens. The resilience of lung is not about being calm all the time. It's about knowing how to return. It's about building a relationship with your energy so strong that you're not afraid of your own intensity. You learn to hold it, to move it, to ground it. And from that grounding, presence becomes effortless. This presence changes how you pray, how you sit, how you move, how you sleep. It changes how you listen, how you speak, how you touch. It is not mystical in appearance. It is embodied. It is quiet. But it is powerful. And when the world shakes, when the winds outside become wild, when the energy of others becomes chaotic, you know what to do. You return to the body, you return to the breath, you steady the winds, and in doing so, you steady your life. This is not escape. This is mastery. And it begins not with the mind, but with the subtle body, with the breath you're breathing now, with the wind you can't see but feel, with the stillness that grows when you stop fighting what moves inside you and start learning how to guide it home. Once the winds settle and you begin to live in harmony with your own breath and subtle energy, something else begins to surface, something older than thought, deeper than emotion. Even with calm winds, there are moments when certain moods seem to take over the entire mind, not just feelings, but entire worlds. One moment, everything feels abundant and joyful. The next, you're grasping for something that won't fill you. Then suddenly, without warning, you feel judged, defeated, hungry, or even trapped in rage or despair. These shifts are not random. They are symptoms of something ancient. Not just emotions, but realms, states of consciousness that have shaped human experience across lifetimes. According to Buddhist cosmology, existence unfolds in 6 primary realms. These aren't physical places, but psychological states, internal environments shaped by karma and mental patterns. They are called realms, but they operate like mental architectures. You don't go to them, you fall into them. You visit them daily, sometimes hourly. They arise within the mind, shaping your perception, distorting your reactions, and influencing your choices. Recognizing them is not about religious belief. It's about decoding your own inner world. Each realm has its logic. Each one pulls energy in a certain direction. And until you learn to see them clearly, they will keep shaping your life from the shadows. The God realm is the state of temporary bliss and pleasure. It appears when life seems to be working, when things are flowing, when comfort is abundant and problems seem far away. In this realm, there's a subtle arrogance. Not aggressive, but insulated. You start to believe suffering belongs to others, not to you. This creates a kind of spiritual blindness. There's gratitude, but also attachment to status, identity, success. The God realm isn't evil, but it is unstable. The deeper danger is the illusion that this state will last. The fall from this realm is often painful because you're not prepared. Resilience here means remembering impermanence even in joy. It means staying humble and aware when everything feels easy. It means using happiness as fuel for compassion, not self-glorification. The demigod realm is more tense. It's marked by comparison, competition, jealousy, and ambition. You may have what you need, but someone else seems to have more. You're not content because your value feels tied to superiority. In this realm, others' success feels threatening. You constantly scan for advantage. This realm creates restlessness. You can't rest because someone else is winning. Resilience here means stepping out of comparison. It means remembering that your worth is not relative. It means celebrating others without losing your own dignity. This is difficult because the energy of the demigod realm is charged. It pushes you to outdo, to outperform. But the true escape is not to win. It's to see the trap for what it is and walk away. The human realm is considered the most balanced and, paradoxically, the most rare. It's the realm of curiosity, emotion, longing, love, and confusion. There's suffering, but also reflection. There's desire, but also discernment. This realm offers the greatest chance for awakening because it's not overwhelmed by extremes. But the danger here is complacency. You might begin to live on autopilot, treating ordinary life as all there is. You forget how rare it is to even be aware. You forget that this moment could be a portal to insight. Resilience in this realm means staying alert to the fragility of human life. It means using every joy and sorrow as fuel for understanding. It means not wasting time in numbness. It means valuing your ability to grow and not taking your awareness for granted. The animal realm is rooted in fear, habit, and instinct. It appears when you're overwhelmed and just trying to survive, when you're reactive, when comfort becomes more important than truth, when you follow the path of least resistance. This realm is not unintelligent. It's deeply instinctive, but it lacks perspective. In this realm, the focus is narrow. The drive is survival. Emotions are lived, not examined. You avoid pain, chase pleasure, repeat routines. Resilience here means breaking the trance. It means pausing in the middle of reaction and asking what's really happening. It means refusing to live only through instinct. It means choosing reflection over habit. The shift out of this realm begins with awareness of your own patterns. Once you see them, you create space to respond differently. The hungry ghost realm is perhaps the most painful in quiet ways. It's a realm of endless wanting where nothing satisfies. You crave love, attention, substance, stimulation, but everything you reach for slips away or leaves you emptier. This realm creates addiction, not only to substances, but to validation, approval, even to pain itself. You become haunted by your hunger. You feel unworthy even when you receive. You feel disconnected even when surrounded by others. Resilience here means learning to sit with hunger without feeding it mindlessly. It means grieving the emptiness without letting it define you. It means cultivating inner nourishment so you don't starve for external substitutes. This takes time and kindness. It takes learning to stay with the ache without judging it. Over time, you begin to feel the root hunger, not for objects or people, but for connection with your own wholeness. The hell realm is the most intense. It arises as anger, hatred, blame, punishment, and self-loathing. In this realm, the world feels hostile. You feel surrounded, attacked, or completely cut off. There's no softness, only threat. Often, this realm is linked to deep wounding, pain that was never held, grief that turned to rage. In the hell realm, everything becomes a weapon. You fight the world, or you fight yourself. You can't hear others. You can't receive care. Everything feels sharp, dangerous. Resilience here means choosing softness even when it feels impossible. It means refusing to harden in return. It means recognizing that this pain is not your identity, that the fire can cool, that you're allowed to stop fighting. The first step out of the hell realm is allowing even one breath of gentleness toward yourself. These realms are not visited once. They live in you. You rotate through them, sometimes daily, sometimes in a single conversation. The goal is not to judge them. The goal is to recognize them. The moment you can name the realm you're in, you've already taken a step back from it. You've stopped being fully possessed by it. This is the beginning of freedom, not escaping the realms, but dismantling their control from within. What makes these teachings so powerful is that they reveal how your suffering is not personal. You are not broken because you feel these states. You are human. And these patterns are part of the shared architecture of consciousness. The work is to become a conscious architect, to see where you are and to meet it with wisdom. When you see yourself caught in jealousy, you don't deny it. You recognize the demigod realm and choose to celebrate instead. When you feel empty and restless, you don't judge. You see the hungry ghost realm and start feeding your heart from within. When you're overwhelmed by rage, you don't attack. You hold space and find the root. Each realm offers a key. Each one has a wisdom hidden inside its suffering. The God realm teaches humility. The demigod realm teaches self-worth. The human realm teaches presence. The animal realm teaches mindfulness. The hungry ghost realm teaches self-compassion. The hell realm teaches forgiveness. These qualities aren't found by avoiding the realms. They are revealed by going into them with awareness. Over time, your inner architecture begins to change. The realms lose their grip. You spend less time in reactivity, more time in grounded awareness. You start to see your patterns earlier. You navigate emotions without being consumed. You relate to others with more empathy because you recognize their realms too. Someone's anger doesn't scare you. It shows you their suffering. Someone's jealousy doesn't trigger you. It shows you their longing. You respond not with defense, but with understanding. This creates a kind of strength that is both compassionate and unshakable. You're not pretending to be enlightened. You're learning to be real. You're learning to be with the whole spectrum of human experience without losing yourself. This kind of resilience is not made of steel. It's made of space. It breathes. It bends. It listens. And it grows. You stop needing life to go perfectly. You stop needing others to change. You begin to take responsibility for your own inner world. You become the one who watches the realms, not the one who is always ruled by them. And in that watching, in that naming, in that compassion, something breaks open. The illusion of separation begins to dissolve. The belief in a fixed self starts to fade. And what remains is clarity, not the kind that fixes everything, the kind that sees through everything, that knows when a realm is rising, that knows it won't last, that knows how to hold it gently and wait until it passes, that knows how to act with care even when the storm is strong. This is what it means to dismantle the realms, not by force but by recognition, not by suppression but by seeing. And as the seeing deepens, so does your freedom, not because the realms disappear, but because you no longer disappear inside them. You remain, awake, kind, rooted, whole. As you begin to recognize the 6 realms playing out within your thoughts, emotions, and reactions, a new question quietly forms. If these realms are not who you are, and if your mind can move through so many states so quickly, then what exactly is the self you've been identifying with all along? The part that says, "I am this," or "I feel that." The voice that claims every experience as mine. That voice begins to feel less solid, more like a habit than a truth. And the deeper you go, the more clear it becomes. Resilience doesn't only come from mastering emotions or calming energy. It comes from learning how to soften the very structure that clings to identity itself. This next stage isn't about control. It's about surrendering the idea of a fixed self altogether. In Vajrayana practice, there is a method that seems contradictory on the surface, but becomes liberating in its depth. It involves visualizing yourself not as who you think you are, but as a deity. You don't pretend. You don't believe you've suddenly become divine in the way the ego might want to imagine. Instead, you use visualization as a tool to deconstruct your usual sense of self. The purpose isn't to inflate the ego, it's to dissolve it. The image of the deity becomes a mirror for your true nature, radiant, compassionate, empty of fixed form, and full of awareness. And by stepping into that form, you begin to loosen your attachment to the version of self you've been defending your whole life. You begin with the body. You see it not as dense or solid, but as light. The ordinary body, with its aches and tension, is left behind for a while. In its place, you visualize a luminous form made of clarity, shaped by intention. It has all the symbolic attributes of the deity: posture, color, ornaments, expression. Each of these has meaning. The color might represent a particular wisdom quality. The posture reflects a way of relating to the world. The hands hold objects that speak to power, compassion, clarity, or protection. As you visualize this, your mind is no longer feeding the usual narrative of selfhood. It's engaging in a new pattern, one that's consciously chosen, not unconsciously inherited. Then you focus on the speech. You chant the mantra associated with the deity. The sound becomes a current that reshapes the subtle body. It's not about belief, it's about resonance. The vibration of the mantra bypasses discursive thinking and works directly on the energetic level. This helps dissolve the fixation on personal stories, internal commentary, and the compulsive voice that defines everything as good or bad, right or wrong. The mantra creates space. It's not just sound, it's a reset. Then you hold the mind of the deity. This is not a feeling you manufacture, it's a quality you uncover. The mind of the deity is boundless, compassionate, fearless, and completely unattached to identity. You rest in that, even if you can't fully feel it, even if it seems like pretending. The practice plants the seeds. The ordinary self that constantly reacts, compares, clings, and resists doesn't survive here. It starts to dissolve, not violently, but gently. The lines blur, the story softens. What you discover isn't emptiness in the negative sense. It's clarity without center, awareness without owner. This whole process isn't escapism. It's not spiritual fantasy. It's a deliberate confrontation with the mind's deepest habit, the belief in a fixed, separate self. By visualizing yourself as a deity, you create enough space to see the self as fluid. You see that the person you think you are is a temporary formation shaped by conditioning, culture, memories, fears, and desires. And when that formation is interrupted by something symbolic, pure, and luminous, a new possibility opens. Eventually, the deity itself dissolves. This is essential. You don't hold on to the form. You don't get attached to being divine. You let the image fade into space. The sound ceases. Even the clear awareness is released. There is nothing to grasp, just open presence. The mind, having moved through all these stages, now rests without holding. And what's left is freedom, not from the world, but from the story of who you thought you had to be. This process builds a different kind of strength. It's not built on reinforcement, it's built on release. When you no longer need to protect a fixed self, you become less reactive. Criticism doesn't cut as deeply because there's no self-image to defend. Praise doesn't intoxicate you because there's no role to maintain. Fear softens because there's no one separate to be threatened. You act not from insecurity, but from clarity. You speak not from need, but from presence. This is resilience, not as armor, but as transparency. The practice also trains attention. To visualize clearly, you must focus. To chant steadily, you must be present. To hold awareness without clinging requires mindfulness. These are skills that translate into everyday life. You begin to carry more awareness into ordinary moments. Washing dishes, talking with a friend, walking in the wind. The self doesn't cling so tightly to each experience. You don't narrate your life as much. You begin to live it. This also begins to heal patterns of shame. So much suffering comes from believing that your flaws define you, that the pain you've caused or received is who you are. But when you sit in the form of a deity, even temporarily, you remember that your deeper nature is not stained. The visualization is not there to escape your mistakes. It's there to show you that your essence was never broken. And from that recognition, you can take real responsibility, not from guilt, but from wisdom. This practice also works subtly on trauma, because trauma often freezes identity. It creates a self-image rooted in survival, a story that says, "I am the one who was hurt," or "I am the one who failed." Deity practice gently disrupts that story. It introduces a new reference point, not as denial, but as invitation. You begin to experience a version of yourself that's not defined by pain. Not because the pain disappears, but because your identification with it loosens. Over time, this shift becomes embodied. It's also important to say, you don't have to feel like the deity to benefit from the practice. Many people worry they're doing it wrong because they can't sustain the visualization or feel unworthy of the qualities. But this is part of the process. The very effort to visualize reveals where you cling. The very discomfort shows you where your self-image is tight. You don't push those feelings away, you include them. Even the resistance becomes part of the offering. Over time, you stop needing to become something. You stop needing to feel holy. You simply show up. You allow the practice to do its work, not by force, but by consistency. Like water shaping rock, the repetition slowly wears away the edges of ego. And what remains is not emptiness in the cold sense, but space, a space where love arises without needing validation, where action arises without needing identity, where life is lived without constant reference to me. This way of practicing also changes how you see others. You begin to recognize that they too are shaped by conditioning, that their anger, their fear, their confusion are not who they are. You start to see the luminous form behind the mask, not visually, not romantically, but intuitively. You begin to interact with others not just as personalities, but as expressions of awareness, distorted or clear. This allows for compassion without becoming naive, for boundaries without hatred. And when the practice is integrated deeply enough, even life itself begins to feel less heavy. You stop needing everything to work out. You stop needing to be someone in order to be loved. You stop chasing meaning and begin living with presence. You become more fluid, more quiet inside, but also more stable, more free. This is resilience, not as strength against the world, but as openness within it. There is no finish line in this practice. The self reconstructs itself again and again. But each time you return to the visualization, each time you dissolve the form, each time you rest in the space beyond, something shifts. A little less fear, a little more ease, a little more willingness to show up without pretending. This doesn't make you passive. It doesn't take away your preferences or your passions. It just removes the pressure. You no longer need to prove your worth. You no longer need to hold the world together with your persona. You can act from freedom. You can love without clinging. You can create without needing applause. And you can rest, even in chaos, because the one who was always trying to manage it all has softened. This is the gift of deity self-erosion. A path that begins with form, moves through sound, rests in awareness, and then lets even that go. A path that dissolves the self not to destroy you, but to reveal what was never separate to begin with. A path that builds resilience not by strengthening your image, but by setting it down and remembering what lives beneath it. Quiet, steady, awake. When the self becomes quiet, when identity dissolves and the pressure to be anyone at all begins to fade, what's left is a space that doesn't cling, a presence that doesn't need constant shape. But even that clarity doesn't protect you from the truth that everything eventually ends. The breath slows, the mind flickers, people leave, bodies change, circumstances collapse, and all the practices, breath, mantra, posture, clarity, are suddenly tested not in theory, but in the raw unfolding of impermanence. The question that rises is no longer how to keep control. It becomes how to meet the moment when nothing can be controlled. This is where the bardo begins. Bardo means in between. It's the space after death, but before rebirth. But that's only one layer. More deeply, the bardo is any transition, any time when the ground beneath you disappears and the next ground hasn't yet formed. You are no longer who you were. You are not yet who you will become. The bardo is the space of unmaking. It's terrifying because the mind cannot anchor itself in the usual ways, but it's also sacred because within that openness, something else becomes possible. In life, you enter bardos more often than you realize, when a relationship ends, when a diagnosis arrives, when you lose a job, when a part of your identity collapses. These are small rehearsals for the final bardo, which is death. Each of these transitions breaks continuity. They dissolve what was familiar. The same confusion that appears at death appears in life when your normal story stops working. That's why bardo training doesn't wait until your final days. It begins now, in how you meet disruption, in how you hold uncertainty, in how you walk into the unknown without clinging to a fixed self. The teachings describe several bardos: the bardo of living, the bardo of dreaming, the bardo of meditation, the bardo of dying, and the bardos after death. Each one offers a mirror. They show you what you are attached to, what you run from, what you mistake for stability. The bardo of living is this very moment, the space between your first breath and your last. It is unstable by nature. Things are always changing. The mistake is to treat life as solid, to cling to it as if it won't vanish. But when you recognize this state as a bardo, you begin to meet life more lightly, not with detachment, but with less desperation. You hold people without gripping. You love with less fear of loss. You experience without needing permanence. The bardo of dreaming teaches you how unstable perception really is. In dreams, time stretches, identity morphs, fear becomes form. The mind creates entire worlds without effort, and they dissolve instantly upon waking. Dream yoga trains you to become aware even in dreams, to know that what you see is not the whole truth. That clarity is possible even within confusion. This trains your awareness to stay awake in other bardos too, including the bardo of death. It shows that presence can continue even when everything familiar disappears. The bardo of meditation opens a space where the mind turns inward and steps out of narrative. In this space, form falls away. Emotions quiet down. You begin to taste what it's like to exist without being pulled by every thought or sensation. Meditation is not a luxury, it is bardo preparation, because it teaches you to recognize the nature of mind when the structures of life collapse. If you can find stillness in sitting, you are more likely to find it in transition. The bardo of dying is the moment when the physical body begins to let go. Breath changes. Sensory input fades. The elements dissolve. Earth into water, water into fire, fire into wind, wind into space. Consciousness begins to detach from the physical form. Fear often arises because the self doesn't know what's happening. But if you've practiced, if you've stayed present in the living bardos, the transition becomes less frightening. Not easy, but less unfamiliar. You've been here before. Every time life fell apart and you stayed present. Every time you let go without collapsing. After physical death, the next bardos begin. These are described as vivid and powerful. Thoughts manifest instantly. Emotions become realities. Visions arise, some peaceful, some terrifying. If you panic, You may follow these appearances and be reborn quickly, without reflection. But if you remain aware, if you recognize what's happening, you gain choice. You are not forced. You are responsive. This is the teaching's deepest offering. Awareness can continue. You are not trapped by form. You are not defined by any one moment. You can wake up, even in death. But none of this matters if it remains theory. The Bardo teachings are only useful if they change how you live now. So the real practice is not memorizing states. It is learning to remain steady when form shifts. When the body hurts, when plans change, when life disappoints. The Bardo is right here, every time you don't know what comes next, every time your identity breaks, every time your heart breaks. The question is, can you stay awake? The practice is inner refuge, finding stability not in outcome but in presence itself. When everything collapses, can you return to awareness? Can you stay with breath? Can you remember that what's falling apart is not the end, just a doorway? Inner refuge is not an idea. It is a repeated act of grounding in the middle of loss, in the middle of fear, in the middle of confusion. You return, not because it fixes the problem, but because it keeps you from losing yourself inside it. There are methods for this. One is to familiarize yourself with dissolution. Practice letting go, not only of attachment, but of identity. Sit quietly and notice how every thought comes and goes. Watch a feeling rise and fall. Remember that everything you cling to will vanish, not as punishment, but as part of the rhythm. Life dissolves over and over. When you stop resisting this, you stop suffering as much when it happens. Another method is to work with transitions. When you wake up, when you fall asleep, when you change tasks, when a relationship changes. Use these moments to remind yourself that everything is a bardo. You are always between something. Treat these moments as sacred. Breathe, center, return to the present. In this way, life itself becomes a series of small rehearsals for the biggest transition of all. Visualization is also used. Some traditions teach you to visualize a refuge tree, a deity, or a light at your heart. Not to escape reality, but to stabilize the mind when the world shifts. You are not visualizing comfort. You are calling forward a symbolic anchor, something that represents the clarity that doesn't move. When everything else falls, you hold that. It becomes your compass when the bardo comes. There is also the practice of vajra, transference of consciousness. At the time of death, or in meditation, you visualize your awareness leaving the body and rising through the crown of the head. This trains the mind to release without fear. It is not fantasy, it is muscle memory. If practiced regularly, it prepares you to let go gracefully when the body fails. It's not a ritual for death, it's a preparation for every moment of letting go. And then there's the practice of non-grasping. Throughout life, learn to touch experience lightly. Love fully, but don't cling. Work with passion, but don't identify. Serve with your whole heart, but let the results go. Every time you practice non-grasping, you train for the bardo, because in the bardo, there is nothing to hold on to, no roles, no names, no past, only presence. The more comfortable you are with emptiness, the less afraid you are when form disappears. This is the kind of resilience the Bardo teachings offer. Not survival at any cost. Not the illusion of control, but the power to stay clear when everything familiar vanishes. The strength to meet death without panic. The courage to meet life's collapses with a steady mind and an open heart. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. You still grieve, you still fear, you still long, but you do so with awareness, and that changes everything. You begin to see collapse not as failure, but as a transition. You stop trying to hold everything in place. You begin to live in alignment with impermanence, not in denial of it. And that alignment brings peace, a peace that isn't about what's happening, but about how you're meeting it. This doesn't make life easier, but it makes you freer, and that freedom carries through all bardos, through life, through loss, through death, through what comes after, not as a guarantee, but as a capacity, a strength that isn't rigid, a clarity that doesn't break. And when that final moment does come, when the breath slows and the body softens and the light begins to fade, you'll know what to do. You'll return to awareness. You'll recognize the signs. You'll remember what you practiced. And even if fear arises, even if confusion appears, you will not be entirely lost, because you've trained not just to live, but to dissolve. Not just to succeed, but to surrender. That is the refuge, not in escaping change, but in meeting it with eyes open, breath steady, heart calm, and mind awake. The moment you learn to face death within the bardo, without clinging, without panic, you cross an invisible threshold. It becomes clear that the fear of endings has shaped almost every part of your life. Not just the obvious ones like aging or illness, but the subtle ways you avoid silence, resist change, or deny your own vulnerability. You see that fear of death is not separate from the fear of failure, of isolation, of being forgotten. It's all part of the same avoidance. And if that fear remains untouched, even your deepest insights stay incomplete. Letting go in theory is one thing, but meeting death directly, not in a hospital bed or a spiritual idea, but in its rawest form, unfiltered and unhidden, is something else entirely. And for that, the yogis of the cremation grounds offer a path most would never dare to walk. In tantric traditions, some practitioners leave society not to escape comfort, but to confront everything comfort hides. They go to places others avoid: cremation grounds, charnel fields, ruined temples, edge-of-the-map places where decay is not symbolic but physical. These are not places of retreat, they are spaces of full confrontation. The body is not just remembered as mortal, it is witnessed as impermanent in every stage of dissolution. The purpose is not to glorify horror, but to train the mind to stop flinching at truth, to stop romanticizing life, and to start understanding that the very thing we avoid, rotting flesh, broken bone, ash, abandonment, is also part of what frees us. What terrifies you owns you. That is the core understanding behind these practices. If you are afraid of death, it will shape how you live. If you are repulsed by decay, you will fear aging. If you turn away from the reality of loss, you will never fully commit to love. The yogis in cremation grounds are not seeking pain. They are seeking liberation. They choose to live where others bury their dead because they want nothing inside them to resist truth. No clinging left, No fantasies, no need for illusions to make existence feel safer than it is. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb. Quite the opposite. It means turning toward fear with full presence, sitting beside corpses not to shock the system, but to watch the body fall apart and remember that identity is temporary, hearing the cries of mourning families and letting the heart break open, watching fire consume what once had names and stories and realizing none of it lasted. The world teaches us to turn away from these scenes, to sanitize death, to keep it behind curtains. But the yogi tears the curtain away, not to provoke, but to purify. This practice builds a kind of resilience that doesn't need reassurance. Most people spend their lives negotiating with fear, making deals, trying to delay or disguise the inevitable. But the yogi learns to stop bargaining, to look at the skull in front of them and let it be a teacher. Every form, every face, every body ends. This isn't punishment, it's design. And once this becomes embodied knowledge, the tightness around the heart begins to loosen. It's not just about external exposure. The cremation ground is internal too. It's the place where your hopes burn, your plans fall apart, your ideas of control collapse. It's where the spiritual ego dies, where your polished identity cannot survive. If you've ever lost everything you counted on, if you've ever felt spiritually naked and terrified, you've already entered this space. The yogi just goes there willingly, not once, but again and again, until even fear loses its grip. This kind of exposure reconfigures your nervous system. The more time you spend with the raw reality of endings, the less you panic when things fall apart. You stop dramatizing what's already natural. You meet change with fewer questions. You stop needing guarantees. It doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means the fear is no longer rooted in denial. You know what this life is, and because of that, you can show up fully. The practice also reveals hidden attachments. Even if you think you've let go of identity, death reveals what still clings. Maybe it's the body. Maybe it's recognition. Maybe it's your past, your role, your appearance, your name. The yogi in the cremation ground doesn't escape grief or shame. Those things rise even stronger. But now, they're no longer distractions, they're seen clearly. And from that seeing, a deeper letting go can happen. There are also rituals designed to mirror this. Some practitioners sit with human remains and reflect not on death as concept, but on the actual disassembly of flesh, visualizing their own body in stages of decay. Not to indulge morbid thought, but to dismantle fixation, to realize that even the parts you love most will change, and that this, far from being bleak, is the ground of compassion. If everything falls apart, then everything is sacred now. This awareness transforms how you treat others. You stop needing people to be perfect. You stop pretending there's time to waste. You listen more fully because you know every conversation could be the last. You hold people gently because you know everything you love is passing. Not as a warning, but as a kind of grace. And when others suffer, you don't rush to fix them. You sit beside their loss with steadiness, not fear. These yogis also learn to turn aesthetic revulsion into realization. Most people recoil from blood, bone, waste, rot. But the mind that recoils is also the mind that judges, that separates, that refuses to integrate life as a whole. By seeing beauty even in decay, the practitioner breaks that wall. They stop dividing the world into sacred and profane. They stop chasing sanitized purity. They start embracing reality without edits. And that wholeness becomes power. This work also shows how deep our conditioning runs, how much of our fear is learned, how many of our taboos are designed to keep truth out of view. The yogi unlearns all of it, layer by layer, not by rebellion, but by honest seeing. This is not about rejecting society. It's about no longer needing it to shield you from life's intensity. The yogi returns, not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who is no longer afraid to be fully present. Even in isolation, the practice is relational. The body becomes a site of teaching, not for asceticism, but for direct experience. How it aches, how it pulses, how it craves and softens and weakens and renews. When you no longer judge the body for being impermanent, you begin to trust it. You no longer obsess over youth. You no longer resent aging. You no longer panic when illness visits, because you've already seen the end, and you've made peace with it. This doesn't mean detachment in the cold sense. It means intimacy with all aspects of life. You don't need to pretend death doesn't scare you, but you meet the fear consciously, and each time you do, it holds you less tightly. This practice becomes a companion. You carry it when you sit with the dying, when you hold someone whose mind is slipping, when you say goodbye for the last time. And when it's your turn, you'll remember what you trained for, not in thought, but in your breath, your bones, your presence. You stop needing answers. You stop needing promises. You start living with your eyes wide open. You welcome beauty, but you don't cling. You face pain, but you don't collapse. You become someone who can walk where others cannot. Not because you're fearless, but because you've walked side by side with fear until it became familiar. This resilience is different from strength. It's not hard. It's not proud. It's steady. It's rooted in direct contact with what most people avoid. And because of that, it doesn't falter when life becomes unbearable. It remains soft, grounded, unshaken. That is the wisdom of the cremation ground, not death worship, not darkness for its own sake, but the transformation of fear into clarity, of revulsion into reverence, of collapse into completeness. It is the space where ego dies and presence is born, where the world stops being something to escape and becomes something to see, fully, honestly, without turning away. When the fear of death softens and you stop turning away from the rawness of life, something unexpected begins to emerge. Underneath all the breaking, all the endings, all the facing of decay, there is something that doesn't move. Not a belief, not a thought, not even a sensation. It's not something you see or feel in the usual way. It's more like a presence that reveals itself when everything else has been stripped away. A stillness that isn't empty, but alive. And if you stay long enough in that stillness, something else appears. Not a vision or a light, but a sound. Or more precisely, the absence of all sound that paradoxically sounds like everything. This is what Dzogchen calls the unborn sound, and it isn't heard with the ears. It is known directly, when attention becomes pure enough to meet silence without grasping. This practice is not about blocking out the world. It is not about detachment or retreat. It is about tuning the mind so precisely that you begin to notice the layer of reality that remains unchanged even when everything else moves. Just like the sky remains untouched by the clouds that pass through it, this soundless sound remains undisturbed beneath thoughts, emotions, and even the noise of external life. The mind is trained to listen, not in the usual way, but in a way that no longer depends on the ears or language. You are not listening for something. You are listening from presence itself. Auditory yoga teaches that sound is not just vibration, it is a gateway. The subtle inner sound is not created by the body. It is not a product of attention. It is not something that starts or ends. It is called unborn because it has no origin, no movement, no boundary. And yet, when awareness becomes quiet and clear enough, it becomes unmistakably present. Listening to this sound trains the mind to stop chasing. There is nothing to analyze. There is no story attached. There is only knowing. And that knowing is incredibly stable. The practice begins with deep stillness, not the forced kind, but the kind that arises when you stop feeding thought. You sit, you breathe, you let attention drop beneath the level of narrative. You begin by listening to actual sounds, the breath, the wind, distant movement. But then you shift. You let go of external hearing and begin turning the listening inward, not to thoughts, but to the space in which thoughts arise. You are not listening to content. You are listening to the field that holds content. And eventually, when attention rests there long enough, it becomes clear that even silence has a texture. Not a sound in the ordinary sense, but a kind of presence you can't describe, yet cannot deny. This listening becomes a path of resilience, because panic is always a reaction to noise. Whether it's mental, emotional, or sensory, panic feeds on stimulation, but this practice bypasses stimulation entirely. When you train yourself to rest in the unborn sound, you step out of the cycle of reaction. You stop depending on the world to be quiet in order to feel peace. You stop needing thoughts to go away. You stop needing people to understand you. Because the peace that comes from the unborn sound is not a reaction. It's not something created. It's revealed, and it cannot be disturbed. Over time, you start to notice the contrast. When the mind is noisy, it feels heavy, tight, reactive. But when you drop into the unborn sound, everything softens, not because anything changed, but because your attention returned to its source. This is not dissociation. It's deeper connection. Not to the world of form, but to the awareness that makes all form possible. From this place, perception sharpens, not in a hyper-vigilant way, but in a precise, open way. You hear more clearly, but without attachment. You sense emotions more fully, but without collapse. You become more responsive and less reactive. This practice also trains equanimity, because when you learn to rest in the unborn sound, you are no longer pulled by extremes. You can meet joy without clinging. You can meet pain without resistance. You can meet uncertainty without tension. It's not that emotions vanish, it's that they arise and dissolve within a much larger field, a field that isn't personal, a field that doesn't fragment. When you rest there, you stop identifying with what moves. You start identifying with what remains, and this shifts how you speak, because your words begin to carry the tone of silence. You no longer speak to fill space. You speak from space. Your voice becomes grounded, less rushed, more resonant. People feel the difference, not because you say more, but because what you say comes from stillness, not urgency. You listen differently too. You're not waiting to respond, you're hearing from a deeper place, and that changes connection. This depth of listening also reveals subtle habits. You begin to hear how often your mind grabs onto stories. You notice the subtle panic beneath distraction. You see how often you tune away from your own discomfort, not as judgment, but as observation. And with that observation comes freedom. You're no longer caught. You can choose. You can return to the soundless sound in any moment. Even in crisis, this practice holds, especially in crisis. Because when the world becomes loud and the body becomes overwhelmed, having trained the mind to rest in silence becomes your refuge. You remember that peace is not outside you. It's not after the problem is solved. It's already here, underneath, waiting. And you return, not by effort, but by recognition. Like remembering a song you once loved. The soundless sound becomes that song. Not beautiful in a romantic way, but true, whole, grounding. The practice is subtle. It requires consistency. It won't give you instant relief, but it offers something more stable. Over time, it becomes a posture of attention, a way of being that doesn't depend on conditions, a way of knowing that doesn't require proof, a way of resting that doesn't depend on external quiet. It becomes the background of your awareness, even when you're working, speaking, walking. It hums behind everything, not as a sound, but as presence. And this presence heals, not by removing difficulty, but by dissolving the illusion that you are lost in it. It reconnects you to your own mind without judgment. It teaches you to be still without shutting down. It offers a strength that's not about force, but about alignment. You stop resisting life. You start resting in the clarity that was always there. The tradition holds that this unborn sound is the gateway to recognizing the nature of mind, that it is the subtle doorway between form and formlessness, between self and awareness, not through concept, but through direct experience. The sound points to what is always already awake, always already free. And when you know how to return there, even chaos begins to lose its edge. You stop being so easily thrown. You respond more clearly. You love more purely. You live more gently. Because you're no longer afraid of silence. You trust it. You understand it not as emptiness, but as the place everything comes from and returns to. That is the resilience of inner listening, not hearing what others think, not chasing meaning through noise, but resting in what cannot be taken away, a presence that requires nothing, but gives everything. And once you've heard it, even once, you can never fully forget. It becomes the thread you follow home. Once you've learned to listen to silence without needing anything in return, a new clarity begins to take shape. The pressure to fix your experience lessens. The panic that once filled the space between thoughts dissolves into presence, But even with that depth, the mind still returns to its habits. It still reaches for stories. It still constructs identity from old patterns. You may hear the soundless sound, but then a single thought can rise like a wave and crash you back into the storm. And so the next stage isn't about silence, it's about discernment. You now begin to sharpen attention itself, not to cut through others, but to cut through illusion. This is where the teachings of the Prajnaparamita Sutras come alive, especially the radical logic of the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra is not meant to be read passively. It's meant to cut, not gently, but directly. It is a blade for the mind, forged over centuries by those who saw how deeply delusion lives within the structures of language, thought, and perception. It doesn't comfort, it destabilizes. But it does so for the sake of freedom. It pulls the rug out from under the assumptions you didn't even know you were standing on. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Not metaphor, not poetry. Instruction. The mind wants form to be real. It wants events to have fixed meaning. It wants identity to be stable. So when difficulty happens, the mind rushes to conclusions. This is my fault. This proves I'm a failure. This will never get better. These conclusions feel true, not because they are, but because they arise so quickly they're mistaken for perception. The Heart Sutra challenges this directly. It doesn't just say your thoughts are wrong. It shows that the whole structure of thought, when misunderstood, is the root of suffering. To apply the teaching, you begin with observation. A painful story arises. Maybe it's shame or regret or hopelessness. You don't suppress it. You hold it still and ask, what is this story made of? Is it a memory, a voice, a conclusion? When you examine it closely, it starts to break apart. The memory is not happening now. The voice is repeating something someone once said. The conclusion is based on a belief that was never questioned. What looked solid begins to dissolve. That is the edge of the sword. You go deeper. You ask, is this feeling located in the body? If so, where? Is it moving? Is it changing? Can it be held? When you bring precise attention, you realize even emotion is not fixed. It is an appearance, like a wave, not a wall. The sutra says, no eyes, no ears, no nose. This is not denial, it's instruction to see past ordinary assumptions. You realize that perception is not the final truth. What you see, hear, and think passes through filters. What you assume as real is deeply shaped by mind. This doesn't mean nothing exists. It means nothing exists independently, permanently, or as it first appears. That insight is powerful, because if your pain isn't permanent, it can move. If your identity isn't fixed, it can change. If your failures aren't ultimate, they can become teachings. The sutra doesn't erase life, it frees you from the weight of how you frame it. You then begin to use this method on deeper layers. Maybe you're holding a sense of being unworthy. The sutra's logic invites you to look directly. Where is this self that is unworthy? Is it in your name, your body, your history, your mind? Can you find a fixed, separate, permanent identity? Not theoretically, but in direct examination. And if you can't, then what is being protected? What is being judged? The story collapses because its center cannot be located. This is not philosophy. This is surgical clarity. This clarity doesn't numb you. It doesn't make you indifferent. It allows you to engage without being trapped. If someone insults you, you feel it, but you no longer solidify the moment into a narrative of identity. If you fail, you learn, but you don't turn the experience into a fixed definition of self. This is how you carry the sword, not to escape emotion, but to cut through fixation. Emotion still arises, but the grip it once had weakens. It becomes energy, not identity. The sutra also addresses fear. The fear of loss. The fear of being nothing. The fear of disappearing. It offers no soft comfort. It says even fear is empty, not as a dismissal, but as a liberation. If you look directly at fear, not through ideas, but through presence, you find that it too has no center. It rises, it pulses, it fades. You survive it, again and again. And once you stop being afraid of fear, your movements change. You become less reactive. You pause more. You speak from awareness, not protection. This also transforms how you see others. When someone attacks you, the sutra reminds you that anger is not a fixed thing. That person is not their worst moment. You don't excuse harm, but you don't solidify it either. You begin to see their delusion too, and your compassion grows, not as pity, but as understanding. You recognize how easily anyone can mistake thought for truth, how quickly pain becomes a story, and you don't get caught in the same loop. Over time, you learn to apply this seeing to every layer of experience: physical pain, emotional discomfort, loneliness, even joy. You look not to destroy, but to understand. You ask, what is this made of? What assumptions support it? What belief is being clung to? And as you do, you stop being overwhelmed by experience, not because you control it, but because you no longer believe the surface is the whole. The sutra ends with the mantra, Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhi svaha. Gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond. Awakening, so be it. This is not a chant to another world. It is a call to let go. Let go of identity, let go of certainty, let go of the belief that you can ever fully define yourself or the world. And in that letting go, something opens, not emptiness in the negative sense, but spaciousness, room to breathe, room to move. This spaciousness becomes your ground. When life shifts, you are less afraid. When difficulty arises, you are less confused. Not because you've solved everything, but because you see clearly that every story, every moment, every identity is arising and dissolving constantly. You stop clinging to what hurts. You stop defending what's not solid. You begin to live more lightly, but with more depth. This clarity sharpens over time. The more you examine experience through the lens of emptiness, the more precise your seeing becomes. You begin to recognize where narratives are hiding, in the way you hold your body, in the way you speak, in the way you plan your day. You start catching the moment the mind builds a story, and you interrupt it. You don't need to collapse into victimhood. You don't need to repeat the loop of failure. You can return to presence, again and again. And that presence is not passive. It moves with purpose. It speaks with power. But it doesn't carry the weight of false solidity. It acts from clarity, from freedom. This is the sword's gift, not destruction, liberation. the removal of confusion, the unveiling of what doesn't need fixing, only seeing. And so you keep the sword close, not to fight, but to remember, to cut gently, skillfully, through every moment you forget who you really are, through every identity that begins to harden, through every belief that claims to be the final truth. You cut through not to escape, but to arrive more fully. In the end, the Heart Sutra is not just something to read, it is a mirror. And every time you look into it, it reflects not what you think you are, but what remains when you stop holding on. That clarity, once touched, becomes unshakable, not because it defends anything, but because it depends on nothing. That is the true sword. That is the true resilience. Quiet, precise, free. Once the mind has been sharpened by the blade of insight, once false identities are seen through and the narratives around pain lose their grip, the path begins to turn inward in a different way. No longer toward ideas or emotions, but toward the structure that holds them, the form beneath form, the subtle field that carries consciousness, breath, sensation, energy, and presence all at once. It's not the physical body alone, and it's not the mind by itself. It's something between and beyond both. It's called the vajra body, and in tantric traditions, it's not metaphor, it's a map. And within that map are points that do not break, centers that hold when everything else shatters. What they carry is not tension, not strength in the muscular sense, but clarity. What they hold is a kind of resilience that does not react, does not collapse, does not abandon presence. A diamond-like awareness embedded in the structure of subtle being. The vajra body is composed of three core elements: channels, winds, and drops. These are not symbolic representations of breath and thought. They are refined fields of experience that can be known directly through practice. The channels, called nadis, are pathways through which subtle energy flows. The winds, called prana or lung, are the dynamic forces that carry awareness and drive emotion, thought, and perception. The drops, bindus, are the essence points where deep qualities like bliss, stability, and clarity are held and released. None of this is abstract. When the practitioner trains the body and mind together, the vajra body begins to reveal itself, not in imagination, but in sensation, not as theory, but as felt reality. The strength of the vajra body is not found in resistance. It is built through balance and refinement. The practitioner learns to feel the subtle currents of energy and begins to guide them rather than be pushed around by them. When the winds are balanced, thoughts lose their chaotic pull. When the channels are clear, emotions pass through like weather. When the bindus are stable, bliss arises without cause. The body becomes luminous, not in appearance, but in how experience is processed. Pain still arrives, loss still happens, but awareness doesn't scatter. It remains coherent. This is the beginning of diamond resilience. Certain points within the vajra body are considered indestructible. These are not physical organs. They're not located with scans or measured with tools, but they're real in the same way clarity is real. One of the most central is the indestructible drop at the heart center. This drop is said to remain through death, through fear, through the collapse of everything else. It holds the continuity of consciousness, The practitioner learns to access it not through thought, but through deep presence and breath. By placing awareness there, especially in moments of intense difficulty, something stabilizes. The sense of I becomes less reactive. The observer is no longer caught in the storm. Training the vajra body involves multiple levels. The gross body must be prepared first. Posture, diet, sleep, breath. Everything that affects the nervous system must be aligned with practice. Not for moral reasons, but because the subtle body depends on physical conditions to be accessible. Then the breath is trained, not just as oxygen, but as a carrier of energy. Techniques like vase breathing, alternate nostril work, and subtle retention are used not to create force, but to harmonize flow. Each inhale becomes a movement of presence, each exhale a softening of grasp. The more precise the breath becomes, the more clearly the winds are felt. Visualizations accompany breath, light entering and dissolving, channels opening and balancing, deities dissolving into points of light that rest in the central channel. These aren't imaginary pictures. They are mental tools to direct subtle attention. As the mind refines, the practitioner begins to feel movement inside stillness, vibration within silence. And in that field, the unshakable points begin to be known, not as objects, but as stable centers where the usual pulls of identity, fear, or habit can no longer distort perception. This resilience becomes obvious in times of emotional upheaval, where before the heart center might tighten or the breath might race, now the awareness holds steady. The practitioner feels the wave rise and watches it move through the channels carried by wind and leave the space clear again. There is no suppression, there is no denial, there is no fight, just presence that has trained itself to remain unshaken. Over time, the relationship with the body shifts. The body is no longer just skin and bone. It is a field of energy, of intelligence, of expression. When pain arises, it is met with precision. When tension appears, it is breathed into with awareness. The subtle body becomes an ally, a support. The practitioner no longer relies on thought to orient themselves. The inner map becomes a source of navigation. This is not superstition. It's precision born of practice. The vajra body also holds keys to death and transformation. At the time of dying, when the elements of the physical body begin to dissolve, the winds in the channels shift dramatically. If the practitioner has trained with awareness of these flows, they can guide attention into the central channel and rest in the indestructible drop at the heart. This is not escape, it is deep entry. Rather than being thrown into unconsciousness, the awareness remains present, stable, aware of the dissolving of form. This is why the vajra body is not just for resilience in daily life. It is a map for death and for what remains beyond death. But the training is not only for the end, it is also for how you meet daily life. When you speak, is your breath aligned? Are the winds steady? When you feel overwhelmed, can you locate the central channel and stabilize awareness there? When desire pulls or aversion pushes, can you sense where in the body those winds are concentrated, and can you rest presence deeper than their motion? These are not ideas. These are trainings. And every time you practice, the channels remember. The winds respond. The body becomes less a battlefield and more a temple. With practice, joy begins to arise, not the joy that depends on outcomes, but the joy of clear energy moving through clear space. The mind feels brighter, the senses sharper, the world more alive. Even when pain visits, it feels held within a larger field. The practitioner becomes radiant, not because of appearance, but because of how energy flows through them. Others feel it. They may not know why, but they sense stability, ground, presence. This is the outward expression of inner vajra. It also affects how you hold others. When someone is suffering, your presence can help regulate their winds, not by doing anything, but simply by remaining balanced yourself. You don't get pulled into their storm. You don't tighten or rush to fix. You remain rooted in the inner body. You hold space. That stability is not silence. It is a living field, and in that field, others begin to feel safe again. The deeper training involves directing the winds into the central channel. This is where the most refined states of meditation open. It's not forced. It's not dramatic. It is precise and subtle. As the winds enter the central channel, thought slows, emotion settles. The division between mind and body begins to fade. There is presence, pure and luminous. And from that space, realization becomes available. Not realization of ideas, but of direct knowing. This knowing cannot be explained. It is not an experience in the normal sense. It is what remains when experience dissolves, what remains when thought stops and awareness stays, what remains when even identity becomes optional. That is the resilience at the core of the vajra body, not the resilience of endurance, the resilience of unshakable presence, because presence has returned to its source. This is not achieved overnight. It is built breath by breath through discipline, care, and attention. The body is not an obstacle to be overcome. It is the path. Every sensation, every posture, every breath becomes a chance to refine the field. Every moment of imbalance becomes a reminder to return. You stop escaping discomfort and begin listening to what it reveals. The vajra body teaches that within the structure of your being are centers that have never been harmed, that have never broken, that cannot be destroyed, and that insight is not poetic, it is practical. When life becomes chaotic, when the mind spins, when the outer world collapses, you return. You find the center, you rest there. And from that place, you speak, you act, you live, not perfectly, not always without difficulty, but without leaving your own ground. That is the diamond resilience. Not stiff, not hard, but indestructible, clear, open, awake, hidden inside you, waiting to be trained, waiting to be remembered, not as something to reach for, but as something that has always been there, quiet, luminous, unshaken. Once you've stabilized attention within the vajra body and begun to trust the strength of indestructible presence, a new insight appears. Resilience is not just in stillness or clarity. It also lives in tension, in the space between forces, in contradictions that refuse to cancel each other out. You begin to see that what once seemed like conflict might be the exact place where transformation happens, not in resolving opposites, but in allowing them to coexist. In tantric tradition, this wisdom is encoded in one of its most misunderstood symbols, the embrace of opposites, depicted as yab-yum, not as erotic metaphor, but as a map of integration. A truth about how awakening is not the victory of one side over another, but the union of both. Wrath and calm, movement and stillness, radiance and void, male and female, all held, not split. Yab-Yum iconography shows a male deity in union with his female consort. But the teaching is not about gender, it is about the meeting of method and wisdom, form and formlessness, clarity and compassion. The male figure represents skillful means, direction, stability, action. The female figure embodies insight, emptiness, spaciousness, knowing. Their union is not a romantic gesture, it is a recognition that no realization is complete without both. Method without wisdom becomes control. Wisdom without method becomes disconnection. Together, they become alive. This principle applies to every aspect of inner life. Strength without softness becomes rigidity. Softness without strength becomes collapse. Courage without fear becomes reckless. Fear without courage becomes paralysis. The practitioner begins to work not by choosing one side, but by learning how to remain present as both arise. Instead of trying to fix what feels contradictory, you allow it. You witness how your mind tries to label, to separate, to resolve, and you learn to stay. Resilience, in this view, is not about eliminating tension. It's about becoming the space in which tension can unfold without breaking presence. You feel fear and keep breathing. You feel grief and continue to listen. You feel anger and do not collapse into reaction. Each pair of opposites becomes a mirror. The more extreme one side is, the more clearly the other is asking to be integrated. The path is not about balance in a neutral sense. It's about dynamic wholeness, allowing life to express its full polarity while resting in the awareness that holds both. This is not passive acceptance. It is a conscious, embodied practice. The practitioner trains to notice where tension lives in the body, where movement resists stillness, where desire and aversion tug in opposite directions. You sit with it. You don't push it away. You don't act it out. You breathe into the exact place where contradiction lives, and slowly the need to choose dissolves. What remains is presence that can feel everything without fragmenting. In real life, this is the ability to remain kind while setting boundaries, to feel sadness and gratitude in the same breath, to act with strength while feeling uncertain, to experience desire without shame, to hold spiritual vision while staying rooted in everyday responsibility. Each of these is a kind of union where opposites do not weaken each other, but refine each other. Tantra teaches that the world itself is not divided. Division is how the mind interprets. The true nature of experience is unity expressed as multiplicity. Every form carries emptiness. Every moment contains its opposite. Light emerges from darkness, and darkness carries the potential for light. The symbol of the embracing deities is a reminder to stop seeking purity as separation. Purity, in this view, is the full inclusion of complexity without resistance. This insight changes how you see difficulty. Pain is no longer an obstacle. It's part of the doorway. Suffering becomes a signal that something has been split within. The return is not away from pain, but into the heart of it, bringing the missing part back into view. When you feel envy, the practice is not to reject it, but to find the wisdom hidden in it. When you feel rage, the invitation is not to suppress, but to discover what clarity it points toward. Every reactive state contains a seed of insight, and every insight becomes grounded when expressed in real life. This is why so many tantric practices involve fierce deities. They represent not danger, but integration. They show what happens when clarity includes the shadow, when wisdom wears the face of what once felt unbearable. You don't overcome the dark. You walk into it with a light that doesn't judge, and in that embrace, something that once felt divided becomes whole. This union also teaches a different kind of power. Not the power of dominance or denial, but of deep coherence. When your mind, body, emotion, and intention are no longer fighting each other, your presence becomes aligned. You act not from split motivation, but from inner unity. Others feel it. The world responds to it. You are no longer hiding parts of yourself to be acceptable. You are no longer fighting parts of yourself to feel spiritual. You bring your full being into every situation, and that fullness brings depth, not chaos. Yab Yum is not a fixed state. It is a living rhythm. There are moments when action leads and insight follows. There are moments when you dissolve into spaciousness and let everything be. The practice is in knowing when to move, when to still, when to speak, when to remain silent. You listen to what each moment asks and respond not from preference, but from presence. In the beginning, this can feel destabilizing because it requires letting go of fixed identity. You are no longer just the strong one, or the peaceful one, or the wise one. You are a fluid field of being that includes all of it. The mind doesn't like this. It wants categories. It wants certainty. But resilience is not found in certainty. It is found in adaptability, in the ability to respond without losing center, in the willingness to remain whole while everything moves. This principle also applies to relationship, not just with others, but with the world. The union of opposites is not only inside, it extends into how you hold the sacred and the mundane, the personal and the collective, the immediate and the eternal. You stop needing to escape the world to feel spiritual. You stop needing to perform spirituality to feel connected. You live more freely, more honestly, less divided. There is a tantric view that says the body itself is the temple and the senses are the altar, not because they lead to indulgence, but because they are gates to awareness. The challenge is not to reject the senses. The challenge is to remain awake while experiencing them, to see the sacred in the sensory, to rest in emptiness while touching form. This is the union, where you feel deeply and remain undisturbed, where you experience fully and remain free. The practitioner of this path doesn't seek to become more perfect. They seek to become more complete. That means turning toward everything within that's been rejected, not to fix it, but to bring it home. Shame dissolves when met with clarity. Fear softens when met with care. Grief transforms when met with presence. And joy expands when it no longer needs to be defended. This completeness allows for a new kind of creativity, because when you stop fighting your inner opposites, your energy stops being consumed by conflict. It begins to express itself as clarity, as insight, as action that serves something larger than your own survival. The world no longer feels threatening. It feels alive with potential. Because you're no longer filtering it through the lens of what must be avoided. You are able to meet whatever comes, not with fantasy, not with resistance, but with an open heart and a steady spine. That is the tantric embrace. Not comfort, not softness. Full presence with everything as it is. The strength that rises from it is not fragile. It is not dependent on ideal conditions. It lives in the tension, in the paradox, in the center of opposites. And it reveals that what looked like contradiction was always invitation, an opening into something deeper than peace. Wholeness. A wholeness that does not require you to be one thing, but allows you to be all of it. Real, awake, undivided. So now you've walked the path, one step at a time, through the teachings most people never hear in their entire lives. Not surface-level advice, not spiritual cliches, but the real work, the deep wisdom that transforms you from the inside out. You've touched the 10 stages of a bodhisattva's mind. You've looked into the wheel of time and seen that even despair has rhythm. You've dissolved self through deity practice, faced death in the bardo, listened to the sound that has no beginning, and discovered that strength isn't always about holding on, but sometimes about letting everything fall away. This wasn't just information, it was transmission. These teachings are now part of you, and as you fall asleep tonight, know this: you are no longer the same. You are carrying seeds of unshakable clarity, the kind that wakes up with you tomorrow, the kind that doesn't flinch, even when life does. And now it's your turn to share. Leave a comment below and write, "I choose resilience." Let us know what moment in this journey struck your heart the most. Your insight might be the light someone else needs to hear. If this resonated with you, if even one sentence helped you breathe a little deeper, subscribe to the channel. There is so much more to unfold, and when you subscribe, hit the bell so the next time you need clarity, it finds you. Now, rest easy. The teachings are alive in you. See you in the next one.